Regis. Hello. Let's see.
Test. 1, 2.
Put the bat signal out.
Come on.
There. Making sure Facebook is good.
Go.
You good?
Hello,
man?
everyone. Hello.
Sharing now. Let's see if I can start a watch party in Octane Render. Almost there, guys. One more minute.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, didn't mean to do that.
Let's say, don't we have a...
I was doubling you. Sorry, hold on.
What's up, Belly?
Okay. I think we're good, y'all. Let's go to our faces.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
All right, we're ready to do a show here. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Everybody. Okay. Everything looks good here. People coming in. Checking out the stream, the chat. Hello, everybody. Lots of people here. We're going to start recording on our recorders.
Do it.
Start a new audio file. What is this episode? 232.
232.
232. 232 coming in hot. All right, I am rolling.
I'm rolling.
Should I hit record?
Go ahead. Yeah.
All right, recording.
And just keep an eye on that while we're going. If it stops for any reason, just let us know. We'll pause for the cause and whatnot. And I think we're good. All right. All right, let's do a little sync clap. So it'll be 1, 2, 3, clap. All right. 1, 2, 3. All right, cool.
Perfect.
I think we are good to go. I got my copious notes here. And see what happens.
It's been a few weeks since I went through the talk. So,
the talk, yeah.
The
yes,
talk.
the talk.
The talk. Yeah. All right, cool.
Yeah, they let me. They made a big mistake. They let me do it virtually. Is there a time limit now that
Yeah.
it's virtual? They're like, oh no. I'm like, okay.
That's funny.
So yeah.
All right, Dave, start us off.
All right, here we go.
Let's do this.
What up and welcome to another Mograph Mocast. I'm Dave.
And I'm Matt, and joining us today is one of my favorite people in the entire world, Mr. Jules Urbach from Otoy.
Hi everyone. Great to be here.
And
Great to be
Mograph
with you guys.
Mograph is a supplement to our site, mograph.com, which is a motion graphics tutorial site with tutorials, plugins, podcasts, and other Mograph stuff. And on the show, we talk about everything ranging from motion graphics to Cinema 4D, After Effects, plugins, render engines, doing business, doing taxes, being a contractor, or working for the man. And you can email us info@mograph.com, Let us know what you think about the show, questions, comments, concerns, topic ideas, queries, and grievances. So I just did want to mention real quick this one email that I got from Adrian that says, hello, I'm looking into the course. I've been on the fence about Houdini for a while, and I'm dropping $400 in a pandemic, and I'd like to make sure that it's as advanced as I want it to be. I guess he did a course, and it was too simple on Houdini or something at one point. So I wrote him up a whole nice thing about what you can do to get more info on the course and see if it's really what you want. Check out this page, check out these samples, and I sent it back to him, and I got error. This email address is invalid. So if you're emailing us, make sure you type your email address correctly. So Adrian, I wrote you back. I promise I wrote you back, but I don't have your email address, and I can't find you on the internets. I tried searching. No luck. No luck. So I have an answer for you. So hit us up again, info@mograph.com. And this week, all we're really going to do is talk about Octane.
Yeah.
That's about it.
Good.
That's about it. I have my list of topics and questions and things. I know that there's a lot of people who have been in Octane for a while. There's a lot of people probably here who are interested in getting into Octane for the first time. So we'll dig into it.
Here's something that I want to say, and I'll start it off by saying, Dave and I have been working on this really big project for the past month and a half, and anytime Dave and I are working on a project together, we always work in Octane because Dave's most comfortable in that, and we're going to switch out, stuff. And I have to say, like, I've been a user since version 2, and so like continually seeing the updates that you guys are doing over the years, like I feel like it just keeps on getting faster. And like so many more things, so many more like lifestyle things, happiness things. What's the word?
What?
You know what I'm saying? Quality of life.
Yeah,
so many more quality of life changes that have just made using Octane Render just so much easier and so much better. So thank you for that, I guess.
It's great feedback.
Yeah.
Great feedback, yeah. And we have started accelerating. I'd say Octane 4 was the last like numbered version of Octane, and then we went to date versions, right? So that we could, because the idea was we felt after Octane 4, it had been about 2-something years. I mean, we were releasing major Octane versions every 2 years. I think Octane 4 is almost in 8 years in. I mean, the first version of Octane was in 2010. We're actually now 10 years into the whole Octane journey. And what we wanted to do was we felt we could put out major releases that were almost as big as what V3 to V4 was or V2 to V3, not every 2 years, but almost every 4 months or every 5 months. And so we switched to that. And that's where Octane 2018, 2019, 2020, these things are now pretty big releases. And we're on a pretty consistent track. And I think, with 2020, which just came out, stable.
Yeah.
I mean, we've got a lot of features. That's why I was saying in my talk. I mean, I think we're almost good on features. The one feature I wish we'd squeezed in there earlier, maybe it was custom AOVs, because that really is pretty high on the list of people. But everything else that we're working on, even some of the stuff that's in 2020, are quality of life features. And almost everything in the almost 2019 to 2020 roadmap is just people like you guys just and on the Slack, right? And just collecting wish lists from people, like directly, me talking to them and sharing that with the team and going through everything and seeing what was in common. And we do have a feature request page on the Octane forums, but there's nothing quite like actually talking to users over many months and getting the and getting that list and actually sort of really understanding what that what we could fix and what we should sort of fix first. And that went into a lot of the releases in the last 6 to 9 months, I think, and especially 2020. I felt like a lot of that was driven by users like yourselves. And so, some of the things that we thought were less important turned out to be much more important. And those got put ahead of the pack. And when we announced sort of our roadmap for the next 12 months in that GTC talk, pretty much everything there was almost from, the user community just ranked by how sort of we felt that, the number of users and the demand and the importance was there. And the feedback we got since that talk has been, that looks pretty good. So I think we're in a good place.
I am so excited about this roadmap. I can't even tell you. Just watching where you got, and I feel like that happens every time I watch one of these. I get so excited about where you guys are going, and I feel like y'all are definitely pushing in the right direction. for this, and I'm very, very excited. And I have no idea how y'all are going to pull it off, but I'm very excited about it.
Yeah, well, I would say that going from Octane 3 to 4 was incredibly hard. I mean, I think Octane 3 was also pretty hard. Like some of these things feel like we're actually, it's more work and there's more features, but it's also like we know our product better. We've sort of gone over some of these humps that happened, I think, mid-decade, frankly. Like Octane 3 was a very difficult transition because we added OSL. That was tricky. That required a lot of changes. And I think we spent too much time on that. In fact, I think some of the things we didn't do in version 3 that we then sort of refocused on for version 4 were right. I mean, OSL closures are an example where it just, almost even the features now, like one of the major features is take all the OSL shaders in the world, make them a native node inside of Octane so you don't have to go searching for them even on LiveDB. If only I had known that in 2016, we would have probably done that years ago. And it's like, that's the kind of feedback where I was like, well, isn't it great that it's on LiveDB now in 2020? And they're like, no, it's not good enough. We want the RGB splitter node, all this stuff inside the node graph. No, nothing, search nothing. So that's actually, I think in a probably even before 2020.2 with all the things there, we'll just bake all those nodes in. It's not that much work. And that'll include the compositor node that we showed and some other stuff. And so, yeah, I think that it's been a really interesting lesson for us. And I also feel like we're getting better at understanding how to sort of manage, future development, roadmaps, and I think also even with managing expectations, because even though we did have a lot of great things in the roadmap, we're like, we may not get to all these things exactly this order, but here's the priority, here's what we're doing, and if you sort of gauge the last 12 months, you could probably figure out how much we can get done in the next 12. And I think that's now that we've been doing this rapid release cycle for almost 2 years, I think it gives people a lot more confidence in the speed at which we're able to deliver things, where we can, even within 4 months, like if we really need to get something in there, we can have another major update in that time. And I think all that's good.
Yeah, and I love how responsive you've been. Like Grant saying here, having you guys on the Slack, you're very responsive.
Absolutely.
Even this morning, because on the podcast last week, I talked about I was having an issue with RTX, and I'm pretty sure it has to do with my old cards on my remote machine. I got hit up by somebody this morning on Slack. I hear you had a problem on the show. Let me help. And so, I know your team is like all about, and you talked about this in your video about
and you
stability.
Invite everyone, which is awesome. Like, I love when I see the notifications saying, Jules invited this person and it's at otoy.com, it really shows that you guys are paying attention to what the users are wanting.
Yeah. I feel like we've done enough major feature development work that there's nothing like crazy that's blocking all of us. So it's really for the last year, maybe a little bit longer, and it's really been about getting to the bottom of every single thing users report and getting feedback on how we're doing, like week to week. And I feel, and I personally do that a lot. And I'm on I join everything. There's a Discord channel, I'm on that. There's like 5 Slack channels, including yours, which I love. I'm on that, and every single time I hear the word Octane, like Candyman 5 times a year, I'm there. It's the kind of thing where I take it seriously. Because I love what we do. I love our team. I love the product. And I love everyone using it. It's truly, it's rewarding, and I don't mind a little bit of digging and making sure that we're really following up on stuff. And I also don't mind any negative feedback, because sometimes it has been sort of difficult to hear, oh, your product isn't working the way we want, or it's not doing this right, or I'm frustrated. And I never take that personally. I'm like, oh, this is a chance to really dig into why this user's frustrated. Because this always comes like, I love Octane, but, and sometimes you don't get to love Octane either, but every time I dig into something like that, I do find at the other end of it, there's actually something we could do better or fix. And that's been going for a couple of years now. And I think it's truly made the product a lot better. And so I just, my interest is sort of like, well, let's keep pushing that. And we do have a lot more users. I think this year we added more Octane users than any other year. So there's a lot of new users. And it's been great to sort of see that, and also see the community help them out too. Like, we can't answer necessarily everything immediately, but there's a lot of great community help that supports the whole effort as well, which is great.
So the summer of stability, I think we all need a little stability in our lives right about now.
We do.
And,
in these tough times,
in these days, I think that's really great that you mentioned that in the video, that you're kind of dedicating the summer to that, and I think that's great, because this would be what's the next one? What's the next version you're talking about coming out?
We have 2020.2, which was released this summer, And we're in the middle of doing a lot of even since the stable of 2020.1, there's bugs coming in, there are things that not everyone in the world, I think as you guys were saying, not everyone wants to test the beta, right? So there's some things that only pop up after a stable release, but not
I test the beta every time. I'm always on the newest version.
Well, I think it's pretty solid. I mean, there's actually not that many things that have been reported since 2020.1 stable. So we're going to be doing an interim release, a 2020.1 update. I think that's probably a week or two out maybe. And then that'll just have bug fixes. 2020.2 is going to have some of the deeper stability things that we've been working on. Like we have a crash reporting system so that we can start tracking any crashes better.
Awesome.
We have been testing and have multi-process where it's like a browser tab where if Octane crashes, it doesn't crash the host app.
That is what I'm really excited about. When I heard that during your GDC talk, I was like, that's killer right there. Is not having to shut down my entire program in order to and reopen it and go back into Octane it would be awesome. Yeah.
So that's in progress right now. So I'd say halfway done, and we're trying to test to see, I think it really needs to be tested in real world to see if it really does work as intended. We have it basically already that way in Blender. That's why we were like looking at why, because Blender has to be that way. Blender has to have a separate Octane and a separate app basically, but it works. And as you guys are seeing some people are actually on Facebook, Lino shared a video showing how fast it is in Blender. What people don't realize is that's Octane running in a totally separate process already, and it's very interactive and it's very fast. So, and that's over a network connection that could run on a whole separate machine over LAN. So for what we want to do is just make it so that at least have that mode as an option. And there's no way for really Blender to crash from what Octane's doing. If Octane crashes, it just restarts the Octane process.
Right.
And we'll see. So we'll see if that there's also a chance, and this is why we have to just keep doing research, is that maybe that isn't everything that's going on. I mean, maybe there's things that are just that aren't exactly in the core engine that are causing C4D crash. So we're looking into everything at once. But the crash reporting system's basically done. The multi-process stuff is halfway through. And the other thing that we may do is there's a lot of these built-in OSL nodes, and making them all in adds, I don't know, like 50 different nodes. So we were going to maybe do that in 2020.1.1, but I think it's a big enough thing that we might make that a 2020.2 feature, put that out there sooner, and then have 2020.2 at least come out with that, probably still be pretty stable, and then add the stability features over June and July. And so I think that way at least we're not holding back some of these simpler features that are that relate to having these OSL nodes built in, because I think that's going to give people a lot of great new features. It feels like it's a little bit bigger than just having a .1 or 2020.1.1 or .2 release. So we want to probably put that out as soon as possible with whatever stability features we have, which can only make it more stable, and then probably roll out some other stability features over the 4 weeks or 5 weeks that follow. And and then we're also working on improving RTX as well. That's still off by default. I just figured that just in case there are things that weren't uncovered during the beta, let's just let people turn it on and report what happens. And I think Dave, even the thing that you were mentioning on last week's show was related to RTX. So we just haven't had a ton of testing. RTX off has been tested for 10 years, but not RTX on has been maybe 10 months if you think about it, from the very first RTX build we put out in last year, and even that wasn't 2020. That was Vulkan, and now we switched to Optic 7, which is way more stable.
Right.
And that's that's been so far so good, but there's still corner cases that we're seeing where people get slightly slower speed, which is rare, but it's not something that we ever want to have happen.
That.
And I don't either. So it's like we're trying to figure out where this happens. It's like I see a couple of posts like in Russia, it's like somebody saying it's 70% the speed. It's like I'm using Google Translate. I got to figure out where this guy is to send us the scene. But I think there are things we can do to speed up RTX. We also are working on RTX out of core, which is going to make it, which is the only reason to really, theoretically turn RTX off is if you want to, keep things out of core or use out of core. It doesn't work with RTX, at least not right now, but it could. And we're 40-50% of the way through that work, so we know it's likely to work well and even be faster. And I think at that point, once we have like more testing, some speed improvements around things that are not super RTX enabled, like volumes, for example, aren't RTX enabled, but there are things we could do to make all of those things work faster in RTX mode. Then the idea is at some point to just make RTX on the default, and who knows, someday maybe just not even have the flag, because if you have an RTX card, just keep it on. It should always be faster or better. We want to get to that point as soon as possible. So we're, it might take a couple of steps to get there. We'll see how, just even the the bug feedback is on what users are reporting. But it's so far so good. And there's a lot of these scenes that people are sending back to us that are 3 times faster. And this is not some sort of like test where we try to make it that way. It's just when there's a lot of instancing, a lot of overlapping triangles, it really makes a big speed boost, and that's great.
Yeah, we noticed we had a project that we were working on a few months ago, and Dave finally updated to the newest version, and he was using RTX on, and it went from, what did it go from? Like 7.5 minutes to
2.5, something like that.
Which is great. Like, I mean,
a lot of instancing in that scene too, which is why.
Yeah.
But yeah, and for the chat room, I am taking down your questions. We will try and get to everything, so keep them coming. I'm copying and pasting for later. Got a lot of people talking in here. Perry was talking about the fact that they use Octane for SmackDown and WrestleMania. They switched from V-Ray and like that.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are asking about Brigade. I don't know if you want to flip to that real fast and while everyone's talking about it.
Yeah, so that was we spent a good 5 minutes of that GTC. I think more than 5 minutes. It was a part of the GTC talk that was that I think people might have been pleasantly surprised about, because Brigade, the way that history of Brigade, for those who don't know what it is we've always had basically in-house 2 renders. Octane, of course, has been out there for 10 years. Brigade, almost the same amount of time. I mean, the team that created Brigade out of in Breda, which is our Breda office, has been working in iterations of that, and for all the way up until Octane 4, I wasn't sure what we were going to do with Brigade, because do we put this out there as a game engine? It's not really. I mean, when it's noisy, as cool as it is to have it be super fast, it's still a bit noisy. And so what we ended up doing with Octane 4 is we took the speed of Brigade in the scene graph. In other words, your ability to just move things around super fast, load things really quickly, and it was a lot of work. We put all of that inside of Octane, throughout everything before that from Octane 3 and earlier. And what you ended up with when we put out Octane 4 is you could move around objects super fast, and you could do, we could drive Unity games and even Unreal, games with Octane, at least at the interactive speeds that Octane's, direct lighting or path tracing kernels would allow. And that was pretty good. And we didn't take from Brigade, though. What we sort of left aside was the shading. There were some things that we did in Brigade that were much faster than Octane, but they also weren't quite the quality. And we just sort of shelved that, for a while. But what happened around that time was that RTX came out. And RTX is a game changer. Now, we put out things where we're like, well, we're doing these tests, and it's 10 times faster. It is. Ray tracing hardware is 10 times faster than doing it in CUDA. So all of a sudden, some of the things that we had done in Brigade on the shading side, and we had even been testing ray tracing hardware before RTX, long before. We partnered with a company called Imagination Technologies. They used to do the GPUs for Apple. They had probably one of the best ray tracing hardware implementations we'd seen, because it was running for mobile. So it was 2 watts of power, almost what you could have in your iPhone. But it was, it was getting you essentially, desktop class performance. And I still think that that's going to end up being in a lot of different GPUs. It's not just going to be RTX. I mean, AMD has announced and confirmed that they're putting ray tracing hardware in their next generation chips in the PlayStation, Xbox. I think you're going to see that even in mobile parts. Intel, I think, is going to have that in there whenever they get around to doing discrete GPUs. So I think NVIDIA is way ahead, by years. So, but the time that they put out, we hear rumors about Ampere having 4 times the ray tracing cores. I think that there's many things in RTX, right, that aren't accelerated right now that maybe somebody that's way ahead could accelerate, like motion blur, hair, things like that. I mean, I don't know anything more than the rumors say, but it feels like that's where things are going.
I've been hearing those really high numbers on those rumors too.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Getting back to Brigade, so Brigade made a lot of sense to get back to as a separate rendering product for 2 reasons. For one, we wanted to have, we didn't want to mess with Octane. Like, Octane is very fast in the viewport, but no messing around with the quality. We are making it faster. If people are using 2020, you're probably seeing a lot of other speed, not just RTX, but also, we've been, I feel silly because one of the things that just, for whatever reason we didn't do it sooner, we've never had light primitives in Octane. Spectron was kind of meant to sort of add those, some of the fancier ones. But those quad and spotlights, if you, as I was saying in the talk, like if you use those, it's going to resolve the noise 4 times faster, at least for the first bounce, which also affects the other bounces. So it's every single other renderer out there has, their lights are basically special primitives that get sampled differently, and they advise not to use mesh lights. Octane's been using mesh lights for 9 out of the 10 years. And it's amazing that it's gotten the speed it's gotten when you use that. But if you do use the quad and the spotlights and other light primitives, we're going to add, as you saw in this thing, we're going to add the different other primitive types. it's going to be much faster, and that's how the rendering engines have done it. The thing for us is we didn't want to make it any less, we didn't want it any different than if you used a mesh light of that shape. So we did that work, and once that was done, went into 2020, and that worked. But going back to Brigade, the idea there is that we can do way more. I mean, we are going to compromise the quality a little bit because it's not spectral rendering like Octane, which most other renderers aren't spectral either, and it does do a lot of shortcuts, both in terms of how it uses materials and things like that. But if you look at the A/B testing we did, right, where I was showing these. One of the well-known Octane scenes like this Italian room scene we've had for years that I love to try and test because it's a great art for this scene. It's hard to tell the difference between Brigade and Octane. So in a lot of cases, the quality looks really good. And the idea is, Brigade will basically be a swappable. It's not going to be exactly like switching from direct lighting to info to path tracing, but it'll be something close to that. And the work that's being done to make that happen is really, really cool. I don't know if people have truly grasped how deep this effort is, but we're actually in the middle of the Octane engine. We're taking Octane out of it. We're putting Hydra, which is Pixar's API for rendering that USD uses. We're putting that in the middle. So all of our Octane plugins will stop being Octane plugins. They'll be something else like render plugins, what we're calling render SDK. It's bigger than Octane. You can load Octane back in as a Hydra render delegate, which is a plugin matching the Pixar API. You can use that also in Houdini Solaris. You can use that in other tools like USD View. But what Brigade's going to be is it's going to be another Hydra render delegate. It can also work totally outside of the Octane plugins inside of Houdini Solaris and other tools like Katana. But what's cool is that every single of one of our 20-something Octane plugins, Cinema 4D included, and others, will be able to load different render delegates. And Octane's already a render delegate. That's pretty far along. Brigade will be one. And then we also announced Arnold is going to be one. We're working with them on that. But Brigade is going to be really good for real-time editing and playback. And in some cases, and I think this is where you're seeing a lot of other renderers as well. Like V-Ray has one. Panis and those guys are working on Redshift RT. I think it makes a lot of sense and all of them are based on RTX, right? So we wanted to make sure we had something that's to the best of our ability. And we have all the source code of Octane to drop into Brigade, to make it as good as we can. I think we're going to have something great that's going to be noise-free, one GPU, and we're going to have as many of the effects that we can bring over from the production pipeline in real time as possible. And we were showing off things like caustics and volumetrics. And of course, we have another really great product that's coming out called Emergent Effects, which is something we're co-developing with Chang Effects. That team's great. And it's a source code level integration, and we're helping them with their code, and we're taking it, and the core Octane team is going to be really, and Ahmed as well. We're all sort of looking at this, how do we make this integration amazing? But when you think about how Brigade and Emergent Effects together could work, if you guys have anyone's, already, those who haven't tried the beta of Emergent, should download it.
Absolutely.
Put a link in there. Yeah. It's real time, right? So it's and the volumetric rendering is beautiful. I mean, they're doing path trace volumetrics as well. And we hooking that up to Brigade while you're in a DCC tool in the IPR is going to be awesome.
Yeah.
And so Brigade has a lot of uses where it just, if you're even doing sculpting, like we have this thing Sculptron, we want to bring that into the IPR as well. So you can even use it to do things like sculpting and Vectron, which you can't really see in the current, Cinema 4D IPR. It's just this bounding box. We want to have better tools to isolate and do really cool things. And so I think that just having a real-time DCC tool like Brigade, real-time DCC viewport that's path trace like Brigade is really important. Yeah. We thought about maybe making some of the direct lighting kernels even faster in Octane, but again, it just felt like there's truly, if you're swapping to a new engine as seamlessly as possible, things will happen in Brigade that are going to be more efficient. Like actually memory will be a lot less. So a lot of people complain Octane takes up too much memory. We're doing a lot of things for production rendering that maybe a slightly less, heavy, production rendering may not, Brigade might not need. And so, you'll be able to do, load a lot more geometry per gigabyte of VRAM. Brigade will also work with Core. It'll work with NVLink as well. But I think that all the different tools that we're developing, we're calling these modules, right? They're plugins almost to the plugins we have. Octane as a renderer will be a plugin to its own, to the stack. Brigade will be another one, and I think the Emergent stuff, which we could get into as well, is going to be another amazing tool. So, in some ways, focusing outside the core of the render and just on, what people need, just from a tools and workflow perspective, I think is another focus for us this year.
So how will the integration work with something like Unreal? On that side of it, if you're doing, I know a lot of people are kind of crossing that line right now, kind of getting into Unreal. Will it act? Can it actually act as the default How does that work if you're developing something that's more like a game?
So I think you guys may remember, because this was announced years ago. I think it was almost 4 years ago now. We announced the partnership with Unity, where Octane's integrated in Unity. You don't need to actually do anything. You just load in anything that has Octane, an Octane material, or whatever, and Unity will download the latest Octane plugin, which is now for integration, which is 2020, and it'll work. And our goal with Unity and Unreal just came out last year. Unreal, to be very honest, is actually doing really well. I mean, for professional users, it feels like, we have a ton of Unity users using Octane, but they're using the free version, which is fine. I mean, that's why we put it out there. But we're seeing a lot of people actually, Unreal's free too. A lot more people, to be honest, are actually buying, the subs and everything else to use Unreal and Pro stuff. So our initial thinking with Unreal was similar to Unity, which is if these two tools turn into a DCC package at some point, and by the way, Unreal just showed, modeling inside of Unreal, right? There's no doubt that, yeah, and Unity added something I think called Poly or something, which is the same thing. So, working with both of these, companies, and they're both great partners, it's clear that they want to become more of a content creation pipeline tool. Whether they, and there's a lot of debates, I'm sure you guys have, like, is this close enough to replace C40 or Max or Maya? Right. I think the answer is not yet, and who knows when, if ever, right? Because, C40 isn't staying still. I mean, they're evolving. But from a perspective, if you ever wanted to render Octane production quality graphics in either of these tools, and the tools were good enough to do your content in, we wanted to make sure that was fully supported. And so Octane for Final Render is one option. The other thing, though, is because we did add this sort of Brigade scene graph stuff in Octane in version 4, both of these integrations were also bad. If you ever want to render a real-time thing that's path traced with the denoiser or with some other improvements or enough GPUs, you could drive an Unreal or a Unity game in game mode with both of these engines. And I think that was always something that was sort of half there. You can also use Octane for baking, and people have done it with for that as well. Although I think at this point, to be perfectly fair to both Unreal and Unity, they have great GPU bakers. So I don't know if that's truly the absolute best use case. But one thing I think we are going to nail is with Brigade and with Octane and the current Octane plugins being able to sideload Brigade, you will be able to, if you don't like the slight noise in Octane in real time, even on 8 GPUs, Brigade will probably solve that for you. It's meant to be noise free. It's meant to do something that I think goes even beyond what Unreal and Unity do with ray trace. This is called hybrid ray tracing, where you actually still rasterize the triangles. It's like game graphics for layer 1, and then the reflections and even path trace reflections are added after. Brigade doesn't do that. It's still exactly like Octane, where you're doing ray tracing. You can have a zillion instances. And so scenes where you do have a lot of instancing, by the way, rasterizing isn't going to work. Like, you take some of our forest scenes that are the fastest RTX on improvements, right, in Octane. We tried turning those into something that could rasterize in Vulkan or Metal, or equivalent of what you could do in Unreal, and it's just 3 frames a second, because rasterization-based graphics are designed for games, but they don't do well with the point where ray tracing takes over. So at the very least, we can provide something that has the best of both worlds. It'll be super fast, 60 frames a second. It'll give you very close to Octane quality, with Brigade, and I think that that's a sweet spot. And it might be that inside of Unreal is going to be give you enough to do real-time graphics for games that are path traced and really high quality. But I think even the level below that's being done by others. I mean, Unreal is looking fantastic. I mean, it's great. So, but I do feel like that we're providing 2 layers above that, with Brigade being, a real-time path trace production render, and then Octane being final frame production rendering. That's very fast, but not designed for 60 frames a second, noise free. And I'm curious if there's any other feedback from users that that are looking to do things other than that. But I would say the other tertiary case for both, and we've shown this for a while, is AR, especially on the iPhone, right, or iPad, where people want to publish a Unity game or an Octane, or an Unreal project to the iPhone. We will have both. Octane, which I think I recently showed to people running on an iPhone. It looks amazing. We talk about that as well. But Brigade will also run. It won't have RTX, but we have a mode that allows you to sort of pre-compute irradiance, which is something we're actually adding even to Octane, a biased rendering mode, truly biased, which we're experimenting with. Why not? After 10 years, add a few more things. But that actually is more useful for Brigade as a shortcut to get to very fast rendering. With some limits on ARKit. And so I showed one example in the GTC talk where I did that very same Italian room that we're showing totally, running in Brigade, path trace live. If you do an irradiance cache or photon mapping, which is what people are, have done for years with V-Ray and Redshift as an option, that could be used on the iPhone client in Brigade to basically skip GI and just do reflections, and that looks pretty good, and that's fast enough to run in ARKit. And one day, maybe there'll be ray tracing hardware on the iPhone and the iPad, who knows, and that'll allow us to really have an uncompromised real-time AR experience. But even seeing Octane running at all on the iPhone is insane. I mean, I posted those videos because I couldn't quite believe it myself. I mean, it's running on an iPhone 11. There's, it's hundreds of millions of those A13 chips, on the iPhone SE and iPhone 11 out there. And the speed, as you guys, for anyone that didn't see it, we posted it on Twitter and it's in the Facebook group. But it's about the speed of my desktop GPU when I started using Octane on a 580, I think, something like that. So it's crazy. And an iPad with an A13, which isn't out quite yet, would probably be double that speed, and next gen iPad would be probably 3 times that speed. So we're getting to, really desktop class on an iPad pretty quickly, and that's pretty nuts.
So I've always been confused of like the why of getting it on an iPad or an iPhone. Is the point of it to like for AR and for like creating games and stuff specifically for the iPad and the iPhone?
No.
Or is it using it as a node?
Because I've actually, I mean, the GDC talk, you physically show the whole UI of Octane standalone in there. And, but I mean, no offense, my whole question, when I saw that, I was like, but why?
Well, it's a great question. So I think it's like, sort of a dog playing the piano because you can, I guess, right? I mean, it's like, no, there's something deeper to that. And that we should also probably take a step back and talk about Octane X and how that whole project's going. So we've been, going back to 2015, NVIDIA actually didn't mind me talking about doing an open scale version of Octane. Because back in 2014 even, it became clear to us that there was a problem on the Mac where NVIDIA cards were just not going to be in the new Mac Pro, the 2013 new Mac Pro that came out, or anything going forward. And so, it's just, I'm not going to get into the whys of that. I don't even know. It's above my pay grade, really, what's going on between Apple and NVIDIA. But it's, there's just never been, since 2013, an NVIDIA card in the Mac. And we've been trying to get Octane on the Mac forever because it's the only way it's been working for 7 years for people is by putting in an eGPU with an NVIDIA card. And what's happened with 1014 and later is basically even CUDA doesn't run. Like you can't even do that anymore. And I saw that coming. I think a lot of people did. So Apple has basically given us guidance on like what it would need to get Octane to run on their systems long term. And at their first, it was OpenCL. And then they canceled OpenCL. They created it and they killed it. So they basically were like, well, there's this new thing called Metal. And we're like, wow, that's a totally different thing, and it's only going to be for Apples. There's no way to we'd have to write Octane twice. So anyway, over time we tried other things. Like you guys may remember in 2016 or 2017, we built all of CUDA. We got it running on AMD, only ran on Windows. Again, Apple was like, Metal is the only, and so basically, I think anyone that's serious about supporting the Mac at all, there's no choice. You have to just use Metal. It's not even OpenGL. That's gone. So, and I can tell you why, because I can tell you right now that the way that Apple's going, they want to. It's like if you didn't have CUDA, if NVIDIA didn't create CUDA, would anything else provide that same, functionality that all of us have been using for 10 years on NVIDIA? Probably not. Vulkan didn't exist at the time. Vulkan still, by the way, is a problematic thing, even though it's shared by all these vendors. And we have an Octane version of Vulkan that only compiles on NVIDIA hardware. It doesn't run on AMD or anything else. But I will say that since we started and we committed to doing the work where now we've got a way where we can rewrite all of Octane in OpenGL compute. It's a very version of OpenGL that we chose as our new language. And that can then be compiled into Metal, into Vulkan, into CUDA. And it works. That's how we did Octane for Metal at the end of the day. It still was a complete rewrite. We didn't, really port Octane. We just rewrote it, and we made sure it could work on both the CUDA devices and Metal devices. And that has gotten us with Octane X, which is now in closed beta. We've got about 20 people that I guess, got in the NDA or whatever to be on there. It works great. I mean, we were done in December with features. We spent the last few months getting performance up. I don't want to reveal any of the Octane bench numbers yet. I'd rather wait till it's just public and the closed beta is done. But I did tease to anyone with a Mac Pro, if you've got a Vega 2 Duo Pro, that card has 2 ASICs in it. It's 1 slot though, and that is the fastest Octane bench we've seen. Period. And if you put 2 of those in a Mac Pro, you're fine. I mean, for a workstation, it's a great machine. So we've done, I think, all the hard work to get that going. But why this runs on an iPhone is very simple. I mean, the Metal API is kind of like CUDA, right? If you build, a CUDA application, it should run on different generations of hardware. in theory, if you build something for OpenGL, it should run on different devices, including an iPhone with OpenGL ES. So with Metal, what we found was because Apple created it for AMD and Intel largely to map their GPUs to an API they controlled on the Mac. They also are very clearly looking at having desktop class performance on their phones and on their iPads. And the reason for that is rumored to be that at some point the Macs will ship with the very same iPhone CPU and GPU that you have on your phones. And I will tell you, the Octane Bench
for years though. Like I ever since the first iOS came out, I've been hearing that rumor that they're going to kind of merge the two together.
Yeah, well, I think what's going to happen is this, because I will tell you one other sort of nugget on the Octane Bench side of things. So we did do an Octane Bench test on the MacBook Pro 13-inch with an Intel GPU, right? That's all you can get with that. That is it's a 2019 MacBook Pro, so it's not the old MacBook. And the iPhone 11 also can run Octane Bench. So we did port everything. We also had to rebuild all of Octane standalone, as you saw with the UX and everything, on ARM64 iOS. And I'll get to exactly why we did that in a minute. But once we were able to just test Octane Bench and see the speed difference, the iPhone 11 is a little bit faster than the MacBook Pro, the 13-inch MacBook Pro. So from our perspective, wait a minute, that means that if you actually had that iPhone chip and even the iPhone ARM64 inside of a MacBook Pro, it would be faster, right? If you turn on network rendering and you make your iPhone the network slave, your Intel graphics chip on the MacBook Pro would be twice as fast. Yeah. And what's interesting is
it'll be really hot though.
But the iPad is probably when it gets, because it's actually, the iPad's a generation behind the iPhone. It has the A12. But if they skip a generation on the next iPad and they go to A14, and there's two of those, you're going to have an iPad that will smoke the MacBook Pro line, the Intel side at least. Yeah. And you now have a mouse, basically a trackpad and a keyboard for the iPad. So the only reason we showed the iPhone first was because that's the only device that has an A13 chip. Apple's done such great work with that, but the A13 has nothing missing. It's equivalent to what we can do in CUDA. It's equivalent, frankly, to what we get on AMD and Intel on the latest generation as far as what features are supported. So we can do OSL, we can do volume rendering, we can do Vectron. Everything runs on an Apple A13. Doesn't quite work on an A12 because it's slightly just is missing a few hardware bits. And all of those desktop class hardware bits are in the A13, last year's iPhone. So we have that device. We have an A13. There's no A13 iPad yet. So we showed it running there first. And the reason why the standalone interface is there is that Octane standalone is probably 10 or 15% of our users just use that. They just create things in that. It's not obviously, the majority of our users by far, but it's something. And putting that on an iPad with a, trackpad and keyboard, once that's ready, makes a lot of sense. That's something that people actually could use, 10 to 15% of users could use that. And it will be faster on your iPad than it would be probably on a lot of laptops, low-end laptops with Intel integrated graphics. So from that perspective, there's a lot of reasons for us to do that. And it kind of, I wouldn't say we got it for free because there's still a lot of work to get all this running on mobile. But once we've done the work to sort of port everything over to ARM64 and just the Metal stuff just worked. I mean, Octane, from all the Mac and Intel stuff, I mean, it just turned on the iPhone when we first tried it. It wasn't actually that much work. We got black screen action, and then all of a sudden everything was rendering. And then we got the interface that the standalone interface is built in a cross-platform framework. So getting that on the iPhone was pretty easy. I mean, we're probably going to be doing some very simple UI layers on top of that to make it easy to load things. But that app on the iPhone can load an Orbex from your Files app, and it just works. And it's kind of a proof point for us mainly to get to make sure that we are running Octane at full speed when an iPad with a trackpad and keyboard that can run Octane is available. And even some of the pieces that we have, like Sculptron and Emergent Effects, those things will also at some point be baked into an Octane X iPad app. So even if it's one app, it'll still have a lot more tools than standalone currently does. That's one of the reasons why we want to get more modules. And back to the phone, I think there is one use case that's super interesting, which is if you take a video, with your phone and you feed that into Octane with the tracking data from AR, and then you drop it in Orbex and you make a video.
Oh, okay.
I mean, that's not that much work on top of actually getting all of the rest of Octane running. So I want to make sure that's in there. And we've been showing AR stuff for a while. So everything that we've ever, in our Unity talks mostly. So if we ever just put that out there and made that a feature of the Octane iPhone app, I think that would be really nice. And it's just obvious. Like, it's a very simple thing to do with almost what we've built. The hardest part is really just is done. So I think that would make an iPhone really, really nice to have. And an iPad, even outside of it being used as a laptop replacement, having the ability to sort of track things in AR and actually, sort of view things and do that from the set is pretty cool. But I will say that I wouldn't be shocked if there's a MacBook Air or a MacBook Pro even with these same GPUs, ARM64. I mean, of course, it's all going to go through some sort of, combined app store thing where Apple puts something on the app store, it goes on the Mac, goes on the iPad and iOS. So I think in anticipation of that, oh, there we go. Yeah,
there we go.
That's actually, that's older stuff. There's one with a silver robot that looks really cool. If you guys have that one.
Yeah, I think that one's coming up, right?
Yeah, these are all experiments that we were doing. So we've done a lot of stuff with AR and AR Kit. All of that has been kind of, split off from Octane work. Although we did tease, there's Octane X is coming. It was 2 years ago. There's going to be something where if you want to do a scene where you're filming something in the real world. By the way, you now have LiDAR on the iPad. That's definitely going to be something that'll be in future iPhones. So being able to do something like with display lights, there it is. That one's really cool.
Yeah.
This is all running live. So this is essentially Brigade mode, or the Brigade system that we're developing, where things are even faster than Octane. There's less noise, and it's still capturing the light, and it's still casting shadows and everything. And so that kind of stuff is super cool. And I think that there's hundreds of millions of phones, and there's a lot of creators filming things on their phones. So being able to give them Octane, and especially giving them, all the stuff that would run in Octane, like all the, kit bash stuff you just load in there. There's a lot of objects and files that I can totally see being ready to go. Like that's a scene that's an Orbex file that's animated from Keloid, which is done in 3 Studio Max. So all of these assets can be loaded on the phone, dropped in. You can do it live, but I also think that there's a lot of value to, on the right is C4D desktop render with an HDRI. And our goal is, well, if that's, using a Unity asset, if we could put that on the phone and make that work in real time or even offline or whatever, it's great. And if we have final rendering possible on the phone, even better. This Brigade mode could still be just a preview of that. And then we also have render, which allows if you don't have any other GPUs, you can just send it to the cloud with the render service, which we're going to definitely enable on the mobile devices, and finish the render at full quality, for hopefully not too much on the cloud. And I think with tons of iPhone users maybe leveraging that, especially if we give like a little bit of free render credits to try it out, I think it could be really cool. So that's sort of my vision even for this year. I mean, I expect to have something out this year that we could leverage on the iPhone. I mean, what we're showing those videos is basically already working. So I think there's probably a bit of UX work to do, but it's not that much. And I think AR going forward will be something that we'll see. I mean, I think it's a whole different audience, a lot more casual audience that maybe have never thought of using Octane this way, never had a very simple interface to Octane. And I have to say that I love all our tools. I even love standalone, but they're all very complex, right? If you just want to have something that my mother could use, which is my example, and you can drop and click something in there and do something cool in AR, that would be great. And I think that the great thing about Octane is that there isn't any. It's not that complicated. If you have a good presets, you can get a really nice render out of the box, even on a phone. So that's. We'll see, we'll see how it all works. And, but I think that the prospects for that is pretty cool.
Well, even with the, the big Apple rumors that someday they're going to have, a headset and everything else to integrate with AR, imagine, because all the objects that you're going to work with, you want them to feel like they're actually in the room, Yeah. So yeah. And I think, I've been a huge proponent of VR and AR. I mean, I've spent years working with good friend of the company, John Carmack, who I spoke to the end of last year about render and other things. And he's no longer working at Oculus full time. He's working on AI stuff, which is really cool. And we're actually talking about using render for AI, because why not? We have all these GPUs. But I think that the VR market is it's both, an AR market is both struggling and thriving at the same time. It's a very strange space, because you have the Oculus Quest from Facebook, which is actually doing really well. They selling out of these things all the time. And then you have, like ODG, which is a company I really loved. They went out of business, magically bought their patents, magically just laid off 1,000 people. So they're not doing great. And I think that it's hard. And Nreal, which is a company that I think is a spiritual successor to ODG. I think they've got great stuff. I love them. We'll see. I mean, I think what everyone's waiting for is to see whether Facebook and Apple, maybe Google, the big guys, really do this right for consumers. Because doing enterprise AR or VR is that's kind of a safe bet for the HoloLens and even for Magic, because that's not what millions of consumers are going to use. And that's the problem, is that you really, I mean, I've tested some of the smallest AR glasses, the prototypes that were up to 4 ounces. It's still too heavy. I would not wear it. I mean, most people want to wear polarized lenses to watch 3D TV, right? So it's like, if that's too much, or even glasses if they could avoid it. So it's tough. But I think that if you were to see a pair of Apple glasses that were like an Apple Watch, where it really was something that you could just feel was like a pair of sunglasses you could put on
and it just worked. And there's, and I think the way that it should work is if the phone is powering most of that.
I agree.
That would be interesting. And I think, that's the only way this is going to fly, because any extra weight or heat on your head is a no-go.
Yeah. The phone will be the CPU for that and the GPU for that.
Yeah. And I think that in a couple of years, it'll be possible to do sunglass AR really well, and maybe sooner. I mean, I don't know. I think that, but I do think it has to be a pair of sunglasses, or else it's not going to do too much better than what we have now. VR, maybe, we'll do well with things like the Oculus Quest and their successors, which are really nice portable experiences. But it's still a very small market. It's not enough for me to consider seriously let's do an Octane thing for the Quest. I mean, we did all that. We did a lot with Carmack and invested a lot in the very early versions of VR. And we still have apps out there that people love, like Orbex Media Player, where you can bake your Octane scenes for VR. But we're still not quite at the point where we can really see a huge market for that. But that will definitely change once you have your phones, all your phones sort of connected to remotely to a pair of glasses. Whoever gets there first, especially if they support the iPhone, where we've already got all this stuff working, that would be great. But I suspect it'll be like Android, iOS, whatever. There'll be different ways to get sort of the same effect. And while we a lot of people ask us, well, I Octane work on Android. In theory, what I was mentioning before about Octane on Vulkan, when we built everything for Octane X, we also made it so we could keep compiling to CUDA. We can also compile to Vulkan, which in theory gets us AMD Windows support and Linux support, Intel AMD Linux support, just like we get AMD and Intel graphics on the Mac. But the problem is Vulkan drivers are nowhere near the stability of or the power of what Metal or CUDA have done. I mean, basically, I think Apple's goal with Metal was let's make it as good as CUDA. Vulkan, I think there is very close. Like we actually do have all of Octane running in Vulkan, but NVIDIA gave us way more support. They gave us essentially everything that we've ever asked for in CUDA. I mean, they're there in Vulkan as well. Like we asked for all these things, can we do this, that, the other, and they did it. So Vulkan on NVIDIA works perfectly. CUDA on NVIDIA works perfectly, but Vulkan on other graphics chips doesn't. So when I look at even a powerful Android phone where Vulkan is a thing and Google does do Vulkan, I'm skeptical that if we can't get AMD and Vulkan working on Windows, what are the chances this is all going to run in a stable way on Vulkan on a phone? One day, maybe, it's theoretically possible. But one thing that Apple's done is Metal is like their baby. They support it really well. They definitely make vendors like AMD and Intel, they force them to build drivers, I think, to a different standard so that they can support the features Metal has. And that also means that on their own GPUs with Metal, it also just works great. So we'll see. Either way, it's exciting just to have this all running on AMD and Intel on the Mac and even on the iPhone. And from there, we'll see how the industry evolves over the next couple of years. But Vulkan hopefully gets to the point where it's as powerful and stable as Metal is across different vendors' devices, and then we'd really be able to support Octane everywhere and do it well.
A couple questions I want to get to here. I guess the first one is it using the front camera to generate HDRIs on those ARs? Like, how is that working? Because, you can see the shadows, the reflections when you move different things. How is it? Is it using camera to generate that?
ARKit, right?
Yeah. So it's using. I mean, in that scene that's why I love that Super Robot, because that's really hard to do an ARKit well, because ARKit does give you light probes basically, right? It gives you that so that and it's free. It's part of the API. Those things don't get updated in real time. So what we're doing ourselves is we're building a point cloud of the scene in real time, live. Like every single frame it gets updated. So if we see something like that TV, the SIGGRAPH screens on the bottom of the floor which was casting the light onto the robot, we are building and updating a point cloud of the scene in real time, and that's used to drive the ray tracing. So that's working in our little prototype renderer there, and it would work in Octane. It would work in all of them. What's cool though is with the LiDAR on the iPad, the newest iPad, and presumably the newer iPhones, then we'll get really, really, really good real-time point cloud data that we can then use to feed scene data. And of course, as long as we can figure out roughly where the light is in the scene, what the scene itself is, we can do ray tracing to that. And those demos that were being shown, we're doing that. And Apple does have pretty good APIs already for giving you planar detection, things like that. We built our own depth recovery thing, so we can sort of estimate the depth using the cameras ourselves, and it's using just the rear camera, not the front-facing camera. But I think that's the reason why we never really went and productized some of these things earlier, was that kind of waiting for LiDAR on the iPhone, presumably the iPhone 12, and now the new iPad. to see how that works and how much faster or better that makes it. I think what we have looks great even without that, but I think that the lighter stuff on the newer devices is awesome. I mean, it really is going to make this fly, and more importantly, you'll be able to put objects cleanly behind other physical objects in real time. That'll be exciting. So I think that's.
So are these are the AR stuff, is that running entirely in Brigade?
Yes. So we've had Brigade always as a totally separate component from Octane, and we've had a mode which I showed again in the GTC talk where we can bake. I mean, I don't think that Silver was even using. So Brigade on the iPhone essentially could do ray tracing, and it could do AO, and it could do kind of like direct lighting, but it's noisy, and it's also nowhere near as fast as what it is with an RTX card. So what we've done in at least some of these cases is we'll bake the global illumination into the Urbach file, and we'll run it in the AR kit so that it just doesn't have to do as much ray tracing or as much tracing, and it still looks pretty good, and it's still noise free. So that work, I mean, those kind of sped up shading things where there's just less noise and reflections and in AO and all these things, that is part of Brigade, even on the desktop, even with the RTX version. But it's a cut down version that we built, even before that, mainly for AR kit. So now that we have all of Octane running with all the full production rendering pieces, we'll also have a version of probably full Brigade with production rendering in there, and then we'll also have a simpler mode where take the take the irradiance cache or the light cache, probably generated by Octane, since it's going to give you the highest quality, feed that into Brigade, do less ray tracing, do it all in real time, and have it look great. And that's kind of what we were showing in the videos you shared. And then in GTC, we also showed, I think it was on an iPad, it looks great. I mean, even the Heloid robots with the irradiance cache look really nice. And that is something that is, there's a baking step required. You could even bake it from the phone, because now that Octane's on there, it would work. But that's kind of how today's iPhones and today's iPads could do, that kind of quality, AR kit rendering, at least for very complex scenes where Octane lighting needs to be, at that quality. But for simpler things like an individual object, I don't think that's actually even necessary with Brigade just running with lightweight, direct lighting and ambient occlusion and ray trace reflections, because that only gets really complicated when you do have much more complex scene and environments, something like that. Interior archviz scene, running an AR kit, that would need a pre-computation pass on the current iPad or iPhone.
Now, as far as just jumping back to Brigade and Octane in the different DCC, when you're talking about developing all these individual programs, Emergent, Brigade, Octane, all into one thing, will we be able to? Are you talking about being able to build that into? Sorry, what I'm trying to say is in Blender, how you can jump from EV or cycles depending on which one you want to use. Same with Arnold, with the Arnold GPU and the CPU. Is this something similar to that, where it's going to be you can flip on Brigade or turn off Brigade and go straight into Octane render?
Yeah, it'll basically mean that anything you can render today in the Octane FDR and any of the plugins will just have one more switch to go and switch on Brigade mode. And I would say it's almost equivalent. The way that Ahmed's probably going to expose it in the C4D, live viewers, you're probably going to have a drop down with path tracing, direct lighting, PMC, info channels, and then Brigade. Yeah. And and if we keep going down that path, and those, so Brigade and Octane are the two that we're internally building. We also, people love the anime kernel, which we're showing. Which is actually running. It's a totally separate render, either, just so we can test ray traced outlines and things like that. That may be a third one. Like once we have the ability to sort of drop in renderers that are based on the API. But I mean, we're also probably just going to end up having that be a mode that's either in both Octane and Brigade. I mean, essentially an improvement on the tune shading mode we have. But yeah, it'll be as easy as switching. There'll probably be if anyone uses Houdini Solaris. Houdini 18 with Solaris, there is already an option there which is similar to what we'll do, where you can switch between, Karma, which is their renderer, RenderMan, Arnold. I mean, we have a plugin for that. Redshift has a plugin for that through Hydra, and it just, essentially the scene doesn't change, the program doesn't reload, it just switches renderers, and that's exactly how we'll do it with Brigade and Octane. It'll switch renderers. It should be pretty fast, especially between those two, because we can at least, we'll be able to share and cache a lot of the same data between those two renderers, even if it's through the Hydra API. And part of why, we haven't talked a little bit about our relationship with Autodesk and Arnold and why we did all this, but
I'd love to hear more about that.
There. But I think just going to how the switching will work, the idea is that even if Arnold doesn't have a plugin for like Unreal, right? We have Unreal plugins. Right. Any Hydra render delegate, and even Redshift, right, which has a render delegate that's built for Solaris. I mean, in theory, we can help, and we're open to everyone, by the way. So it's just like with Render itself, we want to support as many as we can, but any of the Octane plugins, which you all get for the studio tier, all 20-something of those will be able to load Brigade and Octane, and next would be Arnold. So you'd get Arnold in the IPR in tools that Arnold hasn't even built a plugin for. I think they have six different integrations. And that's pretty cool. So it's also necessary. There's a reason. It's altruistic. This is like, well, it's great to be able to give people more renders. But Hydra itself, the way we're doing this, it's hard to do inside of your DCC. Like Blender has it on their roadmap for 10 years out or something. So being able to bring in any Hydra render delegate into Blender is great. Into After Effects or Nuke. All these things don't have this support yet. They might eventually, and that's great. But we need something else from being able to. The reason why we're supporting multiple renders besides our own, and the reason why we partnered with Autodesk and Arnold, is going back years to Render. And maybe, I don't know if we want to cover other topics before we get into Render, but Render is I've always said it's bigger than just Octane, and it will have more than just Octane on the service. So in order to make that work, we almost, we're not going to, build this thing 10 times. We basically need a way to bring in third-party renders that we'd want to have on the render service. And that has to almost has to work the same way inside of our plugins, instead of everything, the same way that Octane does. So the only way to make that really viable was to come up with a render plugin API for Octane plugins and dogfood that ourselves and use that. As it turns out, Hydra seemed to make a lot of sense because it's already a lot of renders have done the work to get most of the way there. But Hydra and everything, and USD just is missing a lot. It's missing a common material format that doesn't exist yet. There's a lot of interesting ideas around Material X and everything else. So we sort of have worked out where we're talking to the Autodesk team at Arnold, and it's a very close-knit group among people doing renders, even GPU renders. Like we're on the same, all the same panels and talks at GTC and other things like that, and so we did discuss. I did discuss with them 2 years ago. Can we bring Arnold onto Render? And they were absolutely interested in it. I think that actually the initial friction was like, well, you guys are a GPU render farm. Mostly, right? And Arnold GPU isn't quite there yet, but it is there now. Like Arnold 6 has great GPU support. It's one of those things where there's a lot of CPU power for Arnold, but not a lot of GPU rendering farms out there have done that. And we have huge compute power available on Render. And they were very up for it. But we also were discussing during that time, like, how can we come up with a common material format to even make something like this work seamlessly? And they have something called Standard Surface, which has been developed by the Arnold team, built into Arnold, and they've been trying to get that sort of adopted as an open standard anyway. Like we're on the same, working groups on GLTF and the like, and we looked at it, and it's really good. I mean, it's kind of like the Universal Material, it's an Uber shader, and so what we decided to do as part of this, public, partnership with them on a lot of levels, we decided internally, like, we want to support basically anything that Arnold has in their node graph in the Standard Surface, like we'll adopt it. So we'll at least if you have, from a simple perspective, if you have your C4D scene with all these Arnold shaders materials in there, and you switch to Octane C4D, like one of the goals is it would just look the same if you did that, and we'd have, incredible. And the reason why it would look the same is we'd work with the Arnold team to make sure that that everything is right, that is, and we provide feedback so that if there's things we'd want to maybe see changed in the Standard Surface or, have advice for those things, they could do that too. And the thing that we're giving them as a sort of an exchange, or just to make sure we have, like, so you can also go from Octane scenes and C4D maybe back to Arnold and things like that, would be OSL camera, Vectron, which is implicit surfaces with OSL, all those things. Like we want those things to be adopted by other renderers, because if they're not, and you wanted, let's say, just take a scene that's exported as an ORVX and run it on Render, and you want to kind of switch renders after the fact, that in order for that to work, the engines, they may not shade or light exactly the same way, but at least the materials, the data, the displacement, all the nodes that you would use, it's close enough. And our hopes are that if Octane and Arnold can get this right, where it's like, we're two independent renderers, we develop pretty independently of each other, but if we can sort of converge around the best of both, and if we can actually have, I think the Arnold nodes are really good. I mean, we've, as I said, we've probably made a big sort of oversight in not building in more, because you can do so much in OSL. Most of the work to get Arnold and Octane, other than Standard Surface, which is going to be a very tightly efficient material node, everything else is kind of doable in OSL. Like we're going to be doing a lot of that stuff, even Spectron, right? We're going to duplicate all of the Arnold lights, the standard lights that they have, the way it works in Arnold is you have a single light, you can switch between the different modes, and we'll just match that. It'll be something we can almost build as a script node and script graph. Arnold procedurals, we're working with them on that to make sure that would work the same in both. And even sort of the reg operators in Arnold, we can do the same with our, which allow you to sort of filter materials and other things inside their scene graph. We want to make sure that works. And the idea is that if you export on Orbex, it'll probably at that point have USD instead of Lean-Bake inside of it. We'd have still have XML. Maybe we could even improve Material X so it could be used that way. But there's no reason why an Orbex file at that point couldn't be loaded into any other tool, even the Arnold running in Maya, and render correctly in Arnold for Maya.
Wow.
And Orbex itself is open. Like we're all of the Orbex spec, everything is documented. It's part of that. We open sourced it. It's royalty free, and it's part of a group called IDEA. And it's great because I think that data should not be a black box. It should not be a proprietary closed source thing. I've actually pushed NVIDIA on that with MDL, which is their material system. They've open sourced it, and we kept asking for them to do that before we adopted it. They've done that now, which is great. So we're getting there. We're getting towards a world where between whether it's standard surface and USD and an XML graph, which is what we have in Orbex, and a simple packaging system, we could get to pretty close adoption between renderers of how these things work. And if Arnold and Octane can do it, then I think that's a great blueprint for others. And I think both, the Arnold team and we as well are very open to like learning from others. And of course, we're on the same panel as Pixar and Redshift and Chaos and those guys. The Corona guys are great. I mean, there's a lot of really good ideas out there, and I think we're all sort of eager to figure out how to get standard to the point where crossing renders is not going to be that big of a deal.
That's awesome. That's a big undertaking.
Yeah.
But I mean, if it pays off, like that changes the way all of us work. That's awesome. Yeah. See, that's the type of good quarantine news I need to hear. Quick question. Has there been an update from the Marvels comic book?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. The last time we talked, was that even a thing? Did we talk about that at all?
I don't think we talked about it yet.
I don't know.
So here's the thing. I was as surprised as anyone when I, I kind of was. Let me back up a bit. So one of my closest friends is an artist named Alex Ross. In fact, if you guys ever entered the Oculus contest, he and John Carmack, another buddy of ours, were the judges with me. So I've known Alex for 25 years, and I mean, he's a friend. I've seen, he called me up and he's like, I need a photo of you for something. I'm like, what? He's like, I'm not going to tell you. So I just took a few photos, and next thing I know, I see previews, which is like, this is the Marvel solicitations for May or whatever, and it's me on the cover, and I'm like, what the hell is that? And then I'm like, and I wasn't even, so I knew then because Alex was painting the cover that was supposed to be me. So I called him up. And I'm like, well, tell me what the hell this is about. He's like, I can't tell you. You have to read the book when it comes out. But I was like, well, do I have any superpowers? Do I die at the end? Like, am I bad? Am I good? So apparently I'm not bad. I don't have any powers, but I do have a fantastic car. And I do run a company in the Marvel Universe. I'm like, holy crap. And he's like, yeah, well, when we were creating the characters, me and Kurt Busiek, the guy that is a writer that he's been working with for 25 years as well, who did Marvels, which is a great book. This is like a continuation of that 1994 book. It's like all the Marvel Universe characters are in there. And there are some interior shots where, like, they, again, just because Marvel showed it, right? I'm next to like Captain America, and it's the craziest thing in the world. And apparently, I guess my name is Kevin Schumer. And I'm not a bad guy, and apparently but I don't know. I don't know the story beyond that. So I get to find out with everyone else. Now, because of COVID, I guess the comic book stores closed down, so I think it might be delayed a month or two. But the book is called The Marvels. It's got all the superhero characters in there. Yeah, like that. There's Cap, and I think to the left, I even drew an hour. This is on my there's me, and it's wild. So there's 6 new characters that Marvel created for the series, and I was like saying I thought I was in the second issue, and then Kurt Busiek, the writer who I've never met or even spoken to, tweeted back to me, "Oh no, you're in the first issue, buddy." I'm like, oh, God, this is crazy. So
it's like a dream come true. That's truly awesome.
It's truly, I'm bucket list. I mean, I'm good. It's crazy. Yeah. It's totally crazy. So, See,
now they'll get you to play yourself in the movies.
There you go.
I should, right? I mean, it would be an outrage if it weren't me. And the craziest thing is we work, very closely on all these Marvel movies. I mean, it's not just Octane that gets used for rendering. I mean, it's not like a secret. We've all of the Avengers, everything we've scanned in through Lightstage or other capture servers, all of those characters. I mean, I've met all those actors, and I can't get into details, but even very recently, we're working on Marvel movies, and it's been through our Lightstage. So, you know, I was scanned on the Lightstage, 5 years ago. If ever,
you're all ready to go.
There you go.
Yeah.
But yeah, that is for me a dream come true. I can't even process it. I'm still not sure exactly you know what it all means, but yeah, it's awesome.
I'm excited to pick that one up.
Yeah.
Funny.
All right, I got a bunch of questions here we can dive into, and then I have an entire list of my own that we can get to as well.
Okay.
All right. Okay, one of the questions was, I think there was a deal, like if you bought a Mac Pro, the new Mac Pro 2019, that you get a license of Octane. Is that still the case? Yep. Okay. All right. Cover that one.
Still the case.
Cool.
Let me there's a caveat though. I want to be clear what they're getting. So they're getting a full enterprise license with 1 year of maintenance included. And so basically it's essentially, you can use multiple GPUs, network rendering. And once the activation, the 1 year of maintenance, I mean, until it's fully out of beta, it's going to be free anyway. Once we go to public beta, it'll be free for everyone to try. And once it's out of beta, that's when the 1 year of maintenance officially would start. So if you want to keep using it after a year, especially with all the plugins, which are part of the maintenance plan, remember you get all the plugins for that. You'd have to continue maintenance. But, frankly, we've also, just for people that don't know, by the way, maintenance is an option even if you have Octane 4. It's actually, if you're an Octane 4 perpetual license user and you want to use all the stuff that you get with an Octane subscription for $30 a month, the enterprise tier, it's half the price. So maintenance is inexpensive, and we're going to have good deals for Mac users where that first year will be fully covered. I think that we may let them keep some pieces, like when you buy perpetual license, you can keep like one plugin or standalone, at least something like that. But we're also looking at extending it. I mean, part of this is Mac users have been literally in Siberia for 7 years. So we kind of want to make it a warm welcoming and not having to even pay for Octane stuff. For a Mac Pro, which clearly the user making a huge investment, that felt okay. And we can do that. So that's the deal there. We might also do something with, obviously the iPhone version of Octane probably will be free. iPad version might be free. So we're going to experiment with that. We're not looking to monetize the Mac version, as much in the first year. We want to just get people comfortable with it. We also want to see if, price is an issue, how many people actually would use, Octane on a Mac Pro. What's the size of that? And so if we, if those users didn't get, I think that free, version, it might not get us the kind of data that we would get. And we do give out Octane for free for that very reason. Like when we found out Octane for Unity usage was this much, Octane for Blender, the conversion rates, very helpful for us to know how to price it and even whether it's worth it to have a free version. And Octane for Blender and Octane for Unity and so on for free has actually led to sales. It's not like an insane conversion, but it feels like we're not losing money. We're gaining money by doing it. So that's kind of why we took that approach.
Yeah, I think one of the big questions that's coming up now, not just with Octane, but like anything that's trying to stay, on the Mac platform is it worth it right now? Because you have these people that are just mass moving back to PC because of their concerns with Apple, and so that's a question too, is like how worth it is it going to be to sustain Apple down the road? It's going to be interesting to see where some of that goes next couple of years. How interested is Apple in artists like us, or are they just kind of moving to the consumer?
I can speak to that. I can speak to that because obviously we've worked with them for 5-6 years now on getting to this point. So I and they know everything about Octane because it's just like NVIDIA does, right? It's like there's definitely an interest on their part. They put us and they put Maxon on that stage last year, and obviously Maxon, and I talked to Dave a lot on these things. Redshift's also according to Metal, it's hard work, really hard work, in fact. So I really commiserate with the effort, but it's also the value of that is the same. I think if you're a C40 user between us and Maxon, you're going to get great support. And I think that Apple has provided, speaking for us, and I'm sure for others that they're serious about. They're like, whatever you guys need in Metal to make this work, we will add it. And they told me that years ago. And then they started to get serious about it as the Mac Pro approached. And, that's why we were part of the announcement was like, we want to make sure that the Mac Pro truly has, and frankly, the Mac in general just truly has a really great version of Octane. So you tell us what you need in the drivers, what you need in the APIs. And that list wasn't long, but it was actually important. And we gave it to them, and they did do all those fixes. And I think others have as well. So I think that the Mac Pro is definitely, like, there's been a 7-year gap between the last one and this one, and that's been scary for a lot of people. But I think now that that's back, and now that they're looking at the Mac, and they are taking it very seriously. They're looking at the C4D motion graphics piece very seriously. And they're definitely, they've invested a lot of time in helping us, more than I've seen almost from anyone else other than maybe NVIDIA, in terms of that support. NVIDIA does enormous support behind the scenes to us directly, but also to all the renderers, and they take it. So, it's a reason why it's been NVIDIA only for 10 years. So I do see that kind of effort from Apple, and I do love working with them because I feel like they do listen. They do fix things very quickly. Uh-oh. Can you guys still see me?
Yeah.
The iPad I'm on is somehow running out of juice, so I might have to move this thing so I can plug in power. Okay. I do have power on there. Can you guys still see me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Microphone hasn't moved, so I think that should be all right. So yeah, I do see Apple supporting the Pro space. The thing that obviously is a little bit tricky is the price, because that Mac Pro is very expensive.
Yeah.
But let me sort of put out a thought experiment, which is kind of exciting to me. So we're talking about how a MacBook Air might have Apple GPUs in it. But what's crazy, now that we know what Octane Bench is on an iPhone, and potentially like a MacBook Air powered by 4 of the iPhone chips, whatever, the one thing that's very clear is that the Octane Bench per watt on the iPhone is like, it's like 3 or 4 times what the Octane Bench per watt is on AMD or Intel or NVIDIA, even with RTX on. So if Apple were to ever scale up their GPUs to higher watts, like your iPhone and the iPad are like a couple of watts, right? For 25 Octane Bench, maybe something like that, 20 Octane Bench. If you have a 200 watt card and it's 100 times the Octane Bench, that would be crazy, and that can go into a future Mac Pro or an iMac or something. I mean, that would be fascinating. And I think in some ways, whether that works or not, I mean, they're definitely, they are leveraging the best of what AMD and Intel can offer. Although I think Intel integrated graphics, I think, truly doesn't have a huge future if the low end Macs are going to end up being powered by, by Apple chips. But I don't know how that'll work. So in any case, I think that an investment in Mac is probably a good one. If you love the Mac ecosystem and you're a C40 user, I feel that's going to be okay.
Mm-hmm.
And if you bought a Mac Pro, you may be paying a premium, the Mac, the Apple tax or whatever, but you're at least getting, as I said, I mean, today, those Vega 2 Duos, which I think the only computer in the world that actually, that can use them or you can get them for is the Mac Pro.
Yeah.
So, you're spending a lot, but at least you're getting the best single slot GPU performance money can buy per slot.
Mm-hmm.
That may change, when NVIDIA puts out their next generation.
Yeah.
But,
Isn't that, there's something in a few days, right? NVIDIA's doing something in a few days.
So they called it Get Amped Up. I think that's the Ampere stuff, and everything I've heard, that thing looks like a beast. So that's going to be great for all of us, I think, to have that come out this year.
One of the questions is, and I think I know the answer to this, is there any benefit for a 2013 Mac Pro eGPU user to switch to Octane X? And I would say probably not, right?
Yeah, I would say, we do support eGPUs with Octane X. So in fact, we've been testing on the iMac. I mean, there's a Vega 64 in there, which is not, it's not that powerful. But the Radeon 7, which is what I've been testing as an eGPU, and in fact, I had 3 of them on an iMac. I mean, that works great. I think that the old 2013 Mac Pro, I don't even know. We haven't actually tested it. There's something, definitely can't use any of the GPUs in there for anything. It's way too old. So I don't know. I'd have to check on there. And right now, during the beta, we're really only looking at kind of like machines that have come out since 2017 mainly, just to sort of get that working well.
And those people are,
put a Radeon,
those people are probably using like NVIDIA cards in their GPU box, and that's probably working better, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't switch if that works for you. I'd stay on 1013 and keep on that. But if you are one of those users that does want to use the Mac and you have an NVIDIA card and an eGPU, I mean, to use that with Octane X, the best option would be to put that in a PC. And the goal and where we're heading is that CUDA, NVIDIA, and Metal of any kind, on whether it's Apple GPU, Intel, or AMD, you'd be able to network render them together. They'd have the same exact output. So you could still at least leverage your NVIDIA card as a network slave on your PC. And frankly, if the Octane X license is free, right, for your Mac Pro or for maybe even some other Macs, you could actually just use the the network render option from your existing license, and it would essentially be covered. And we also do offer network slave licenses for $9.99 a month or something less if you get a year, so it's not that expensive to get that going.
I was going to say, you also talked about in your GDC talk talked again about headless rendering as well.
Yeah.
And was that coming in 2020.2, or is that still on the roadmap?
It's still on the roadmap, and I think that part of what's happening with every release we do is that, and that's the I think headless rendering is it's one of these things like 60 or 70% done. And the question is, do we, I don't think that should come before the stability stuff or even the node work. So I think we're just going to get stability and node work done first. And then I think we need to, I also just want to canvas people. Do you need headless rendering before custom AOV work or some of the other things there? The roadmap is our best guess is what in April 10th when I made that video was what do people want in what order? But even since then, it's been clear that maybe that order needs to be swapped or changed a little bit. So what actually ends up in 2020.2 first or in 2020.3 is there. Headless rendering is definitely close enough where it's like it shouldn't be that far out, but I also don't want to put that, it's one of those things where it doesn't truly give you a benefit if you don't need it, right? If you have a great GPU on your master machine, and frankly, even when we put out Octane X, it'll run on almost anything. So it's a question of whether or not we want to accelerate that. It's still something I think we should and can do this summer. The question is, do we put that ahead of some other stuff? And I think custom AOVs is one of those things that are, it's simple things, even like nested dielectrics. It's like we're so close. That was a feature that a lot of users want in terms of that rendered effect. It's not that much work. So we're just looking at all those things. I think that everything in the 2020.2 and in the early part of that feature roadmap work is all kind of in play for the summer. And we'll definitely figure out where the headless rendering piece comes in. It definitely would be useful, for example, on an iPad, an older current iPad, because there's no 813 on that. We can't run full Octane. So the only way to make Octane kind of useful, even with the full standalone interface, would be to use headless rendering. But one thing we were testing, and we showed that for the first time, is you could use headless rendering not just with a GPU that's on your own network on LAN or Wi-Fi even, but over a cellular connection.
Yes, and that was killer. Yeah, that was so killer.
Yeah. So we did that over one of our CTO, Charlie, had a cell phone or the Android phone, the Wi-Fi hotspot for the MacBook, and that's what we used to connect to another PC that had the 22080 Ti's in there, and that's what I was showing in that MacBook running that kitchen, that interior ArchViz scene, and it was totally usable. I was like, this is pretty good. Yeah. There's definitely a little bit of a like you're sending. It's almost like network rendering itself, where you send the data over the network slaves. Takes a little bit.
It's going to take some time
data to do it, but once all that's there, you can still move objects around and relight things and change stuff. And what's crazy is that with 5G, frankly, it's not going to be the craziest thing in the world to use your phone as a hotspot from your laptop or even from your iPhone, right, or for your iPad, and that's going to make. The latency on 5G and even the speeds are crazy. So it's like. But even on sort of LTE or 4G, it's pretty usable. It's not perfect, but it's usable. And so I think that was like when we enable headless rendering, we do want to make it so you can just connect over the internet back to your home machine and just use it that way.
That would be insane.
What's the hurdle? Like
being able to be at the beach and use your phone as like connect to that and then be able to use your home computers. Dude, I just work from the beach the whole time. Right?
Yeah. Well, that's the thing is there are solutions that do that really well already. I personally use a bunch of them, and we built our own streaming stack ourselves. But this is a little different. This means that you're actually doing work locally. Like if there's ever, if you ever wanted to use things like standalone tools with all the other things like Sculptron, or let's just say, C4D ever became an iPad app and they could launch plugins like Octane or whatever, we can still. I see that happening. I do see that like at some point an iPad with a keyboard and a trackpad is a little bit like a computer, and whether the iPhone has the same features or not, I don't know, but it does feel like there's going to be a use case where having headless rendering totally work over cellular should happen. And it's not it's also we've seen even when we got it working over Wi-Fi, that was where like okay, there's still some latency reliability, but it wasn't that much crazier if you have a good cell connection. It just works. And and if it breaks down, if you still have the ability, even on that device, to still do some local rendering, that's pretty good. The biggest issue with the iPhone right now is VRAM. We're even though the iPhone has maybe 3 gigs, it only has 2 usable. So you're back to 580 as far as what you can fit into memory practically. But the iPad, the 1 terabyte iPad, the one I'm actually talking to you guys on right now, has 6 gigs of VRAM, which people may not realize. That's a lot. And if there's a newer iPad with 12, I mean, you're getting into pretty good.
Can you do out of core on the iPhone and like?
No, you know why? Because everything on those devices is the same. System memory and GPU memory is shared between them. So it's 6 gigs of video memory, but it's also 6 gigs of memory. Period. For the CPU. Our CPU and GPU are one chip, one memory. And there is one thing we can do on those devices, which is we can use texture compression way more than it's like 10 times better compression than on the desktops.
Oh, yeah.
And that's something we haven't enabled yet, but we will. And that means the textures could be way, way, way less memory than on the PC. So,
did you get shocked there, man?
That could be exciting.
No, my my stupid refrigerator popped, and then it caused a pop in my ear, and then my screen went out on my right side and it just scared me.
Everything's still recording, right?
Everything's still going. Sorry.
Yeah, recording's good on my end.
All right. I was going to ask you, gosh, we have so many questions we got to get to here. I was going to ask you if I'm on my computer and I have, let's say, I've got my 4 GPUs on the other computer running, I can turn off all my GPUs except one, right? And so it's not, but you can't turn that one off. That would be headless rendering, essentially. What is the hurdle? What is the hurdle that you're facing for that right there, to be able to just turn off that one local GPU, from a technical level, I guess?
That is a great question, and the reason why you always have one GPU on there is that it's not that network rendering needs one GPU. It's that Octane needs one GPU connected to the app to process it, right? I mean, it's like there's everything from the way displacement works. There's a lot of stuff that's calculated almost on the host, and we send a lot less data over to those network slaves to run the rest of the render.
Gotcha.
So when you're calculating like vertex displacement, that's not calculated at all on the slaves. It's just done by Octane once on the master, and then that's sort of cloned or replicated to the network slaves and even to other GPUs. So the barrier to headless rendering is we are basically have to run most of Octane on the network slaves, not just the render part, which is sort of the simplest piece. So when you're, for example, on network rendering, doing something like picking a material right in the viewport, that also is done by the one GPU that's local. There's a lot of things that are handled by Octane just running on the same system that we take for granted and have taken for granted, other than in Blender, where we had this very strange like situation where we are really running Octane more than headlessly. It's running over the network. It's a little bit kind of why we knew we could do it is we had Blender as a working example of how this could work. So building that into the core of Octane does mean, changing the way that we use that first GPU to the point where it's all virtualized. It's all sort of over the network. And part of why the multi-GPU the multi-process thing for Octane 2020.2 is even on the roadmap and viable is because we can actually just turn on headless rendering and run up a slave sort of in the background. And that's exactly how the headless rendering would work. How multi-process would work when we enable it. It'll basically use the work we're doing for headless rendering to run, no GPU on the actual Octane, plugin side. And it would treat essentially the slave render, the slave node, which would run on the same machine, as a headless render slave. And that way, if that crashes, you could boot it up again, and headless rendering would work the same way as well. You could still just reload Octane through that. So that's kind of how that process works. It is still a fair amount of work. There's still a lot of architectural stuff that's been baked in, but we've, it's pretty far enough along now that, those two things will sort of come together. So headless rendering and the multi-process version of Octane would essentially be using the same system, where all of Octane's kind of just running outside of Octane's plugin and even the core engine, and it all sort of just works through network messaging, and that would run, that would work whether it's on the very same machine, or it would work fine if it's on a cell connection over, to another system somewhere else. Obviously, if it's on the same machine, you're going to see a lot more of the feedback that you're seeing in real time, like in Blender, which looks and works great. That's our goal. So hopefully, there's not going to be much of a latency or delay from implementing that mode. But they're both essentially leveraging the same work, which is taking that first GPU out of the master, slot and just having all of Octane running essentially over the slave node or the slave process.
Cool. One of the questions here is, will adding Brigade and Emergent, is that going to change the price? Is that going to be like an add-on, or is that just going to be included once that comes out?
I'm also curious about the Emergent like integration and stuff like that.
Yeah, so we should probably talk about all those things. So I think the short answer is yes and no, because it's not a short answer. So yes, in the sense of Brigade is, I don't think we're going to consider Brigade to be a separate, product from Octane in the, certainly when we roll it out. We don't want to have it not be available to all existing Octane users.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that in the case of Emergent is a product that has a cost, right? I mean, it's like, if you don't want to buy it through Emergent Effects, which is the product we're building and providing to Octane users, it's, it's like $300 or whatever, to $250, I think, a year or something on the Django Effects site. So, what we will do though is we will provide a discount to get that, to get Emergent FX, our version, if you're already an existing Octane user, for sure. And there'll also be some sort of like, there's already a 14-day free trial, but we'll do something that's more, that's maybe longer or more involved or something. And to be honest, we're still sorting those things out. We'll probably know by the end of this month, we'll have some clarity. And our plan is actually not wait very long to even put the current Emergent standalone tool on the shop page and provide some value there for our users that want to leverage it. So I think that in order to use the full features of Emergent, there will definitely be some additional cost on top of your subscription. I don't think it'll be anything crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that may also not happen immediately. Like we're definitely open to the idea of providing Emergent Effects, even as a potentially for free for a little bit, just to see how people use it and how it works before we would add any sort of monthly pricing on top of that.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's also a possibility we may just have a more limited version of it that does something less than the full version that would still be available to all of our subscribers. So we're sort of figuring out what makes the most sense. And part of that is getting feedback from users, like what kind of, price extra would make this thing non-viable for you to use.
Mm-hmm.
And only way to know that is to actually almost give people a chance to use it really within the ecosystem that we're developing with Emergent and Django Effects for this to be inside of Octane, and then provide a feedback loop as to what the cost might be. Now, I think that it certainly won't be any more than the cost of getting Emergent on the Django Effects site. So it'll be probably less than that, and that's good, because I think that means that even if you just like Emergent and want to use it without any sort of integration, it's still going to be a good deal to get it through your Octane sub. But there's also a lot of other tools. Like we do have, things like Sculptron, and we have potentially third parties that may want to build things. We were showing the Storm granular solver, which is a great physics tool. So I think that what we're going to end up doing is almost giving people the option to get very inexpensive subscriptions to tools that are third-party tools. And Emergent obviously is like not quite first party, because we're obviously taking the code and we're building the product with them. But I think for future things, there's no reason to not open up that marketplace, almost like we did for the plugins in the early days of Octane, where the plugins, I think people are happier now, where you just get all the plugins and it's part of your very cheap subscription price, and it just works. Maybe one day when we add enough of these tool plugins, or we create enough of them, that can also be part of that one subscription. But I think that we have to figure out what the popularity of those things are. And I think that the way to get there is to start with really great tools like Emergent Effects that could be, they could be considered as part of a bundle, or maybe create a second bundle, like just get all of the tools, including Emergent Effects and some other things for a very inexpensive additional price, or some super bundle. And I think also letting people just look at the SDK that we've built. So one of the interesting with Emergent Effects is it does not work on the Mac, for example, or the iPad. We're going to take the same cross-compiler, the render SDK we call it, right, that allows you to cross-compile Octane onto these different backends. Take the Emergent source code, do the same thing. So that will allow it to run on the Mac and on iPhones and everything else. And if we provide that as an SDK for all potential tool developers, we use it ourselves, then having a marketplace for those things, or even allowing people to make it be usage-based, maybe render credits pays for it or something, I don't know, something along those lines is interesting. But yeah, our goal is to try to get as much value as possible for, one monthly cost. So whether it's a little bit more or around the same, I think Emergent Effects and certainly Brigade is going to be, part of the sort of inexpensive pricing model we have now. We're not looking to make it anything too much higher than that to give people everything. So
I'm curious about the integration with Emergent. Like as of right now, if I understand it correctly, they're just a standalone program, correct?
Yep.
Kind of like Octane standalone. But then you've created all these additional downloads for, all the different DCC. Are they planning on doing that and incorporating that? I don't know if you can speak for them directly, or if you I would love to be able to use Emergent directly in C4D with Octane Render. You know what I'm saying?
So that's why this partnership actually exists, because that was not really on their roadmap, but they were seeing a lot of their beta users using Octane and trying to export from their standalone tool into Octane and vice versa. So it was a very straightforward way of exploring how we could do something together, because the arrangement is really that the reason why we're taking the source code and we're doing all this development work is, I mean, there's a sort of feedback loop where I think can also help them make a better standalone product. But what you're talking about is something that we're going to be building anyway in Octane. Like, we're building a system where third-party renderers like Arnold, or our own renderers like Brigade, or other tools can be built using this SDK, right? And the way the SDK works is that once you build it once, it works in all. It's like it'll work in Octane standalone. It'll also work in all of the Octane plugins, just as if we were to add an OSL shader in one plugin. It'll work in all the other ones too. So the modular SDK is essentially a Photoshop plugin equivalent for Octane itself. Like, you're just extending Octane. And even the fact that Octane itself is now the rendering part as a plugin means that once we add Emergent Effects and turn it from a standalone app into a module that we can plug into all the VCC things, we'll just have it so that it'll just run. I mean, it's already possible for anyone to develop that work already. There's a module, preferences tab in Octane that has never been used. It's designed almost for us to test things internally, that we've been using to load in Brigade and other things that just allow us to have a full compiled library or extension Octane, more than what the script nodes or what the OSL shaders allow. And that's what Emergent's going to be built in. And I think once that's in place, then if you have a module, it's almost like we'll probably ship Emergent with Octane at that point. It'll work in all the plugins, and whether you want to activate or keep activating it at a certain point, it'll maybe turn on or off, or you'll have to export to VDB or something. Cool. But that's how these modules work. So our goal is that you don't even have to go and really download them or get them. It'll kind of be like LiveDB. If we create a new one, it'll be, you'll be able to sort of click once, it'll be downloaded once, and whether you're in C4D or Nuke or Blender or Unity, Emergent Effects will just work, Brigade will just work, and potentially anything could just work. And the cool part is that you see even TFD, we're having, talked to Joss a lot as well. Everything makes sense as a module, because we do have plugins everywhere. We are also not going to make it so that plugins are only limited Octane. Like, somebody was asking me yesterday, if I get Emergent Effects from you guys, would it work with Redshift? Sure. If we basically run the simulation in C4D inside the Octane plugin, that's fine. But if you also have Redshift, the simulation could then be rendered in Redshift, not as necessarily with the same degree of directness. Like, you still have to probably go through an export step. But it would work, and it wouldn't, certainly would work better than trying to do it all outside of C4D like it is now in the standalone. So the goal from both our efforts and the Emergent team's effort is to get moving objects, like they're looking at a lean bake or FBX essentially, so that you can actually import an animated scene and run Emergent on top of that. But along that same time frame, what we want to do is make sure that works within C4D, so that you don't have to export to anything. It would just run inside of C4D, the same way that Ahmed's done everything with Octane Scatter and things like that. It would just take whatever's going on in the IPR, and it would just be fed into Emergent directly, and the data from Emergent's simulation would be fed back into Octane or Brigade directly. So you wouldn't have to save as VDB. You wouldn't even have to store as VDB. You could just, if it's fast enough and you have enough GPUs thrown at the problem, which we're also looking at doing for Emergent, is getting it multi-GPU support. The idea is you don't have to save a VDB. And it could even be, depending on the size of how big the scene is, and which we're also working on expanding, for Emergent, if we can support that better, it might just be cheaper to simulate rather than cache it. And that's going to be interesting to see, and especially for cloud jobs or render jobs, probably makes sense just to send the Emergent simulation in the URBEX and let it sort of run while it's rendering. I mean, it's just going to be less data. And more importantly, a VDB being fed into Octane might render slower than us being able to take the Emergent data directly from the simulation and render that directly in Octane. There's a lot of reasons why that might take up less memory. It might render faster, but also with Brigade and already with the Emergent team having really fast volumetric rendering in their viewport, and also have a mode where this all kind of just works in real time from C4D as well. That's going to be pretty cool, and it'll be the same in other tools like Blender, all of them essentially.
That's awesome.
EJ,
that's super exciting.
EJ Hassenfrost is asking. I got two questions from him. Number one, for Emergent and Brigade, like kernel switching, is there an estimate on when we should expect that? Maybe even if it's like a beta estimate.
Yeah. So I think that You know, I mean, it's tough to say because I don't want to give something and get it wrong.
Right.
I mean, everything that I put in that GTC roadmap is our 1 year roadmap. It's not even truly meant to be 1 year out from there. It's meant to be in the next 7 to 8 months, right? So I would say that we're hoping to get all those things out. The integrated version of both Brigade and Emergent this year. That's at least as a beta. Maybe sooner. I think that we just need to get further along in both these projects. Probably a very good time frame that we could provide a meaningful update would be around what used to be SIGGRAPH, because now we're going virtual again with these things. So we'll probably do another video update around SIGGRAPH, maybe some release notes, things like that, show progress reports. I mean, internally, I'd like to see Brigade way further along even what we had at the GTC talk by June or July. So we'll definitely provide updates, even maybe up to that point. And Emergent Effects, I mean, I've been very sort of transparent about almost the steps needed for it to go to that point. I mean, the first thing is we have to get it. The back-end licensing just needs to work. Like even the standalone Emergent right now, we just want that to be activated with your Octane account, whether it's paid, free, give whatever it is. That's weeks away. Then we're going to be working on getting the actual round tripping between the standalone Emergent tool and Octane to almost be seamless, so when they do add something like a Leanbig support or whatever, or even if the current meshes that get sent over, we can at least make it so that you can maybe click a button and have it open up in Emergent Effects, have it be simulated, and then load the VDB or this that back into the tool. Even for Skullcron, we want to get that working. That round tripping is not something that needs to go to full embedded module, so that'll be sort of intermediate. So that actually probably will be something we should get going this summer. And I would say that within a couple of months after, I'd love to see Emergent fully running inside of all the Octane plugins. And so that's a rough estimate of time, and whether it gets done faster or slower is really tough to say until we're further along. But I mean, we're not looking at pushing this thing out there into 2021. I mean, we really want all these pieces out there sooner than later. And I think the great thing is with both Skullcron and Emergent, and actually nobody's seen that Alpha 2 version of Skullcron. It's way further along than the one we put out a few months back. They're usable as standalone tools. And if we can get the round tripping time to be a very quick add-on to those pieces, I think that'll keep people covered, and it'll make the utility of getting these tools and using them, pretty valuable until we have the full integration going. So I think that's just where we're at. I'd be sad if we didn't get this, all sorted out, by, essentially by winter. And beta stuff maybe even sooner than that. And Brigade and Emergent are very different. Like Brigade, I would say is because it's not even a standalone product yet. There's a lot more things that we're looking at doing. And there's another flip side, which is Brigade right now. The initial version that we're looking at would be RTX only. I mean, of course, we have this thing working on the iPad, but that is a whole other beast. So I think that we'd probably have a very first release that would be running on Vulkan, NVIDIA, RTX only, just because Vulkan drivers on NVIDIA work great. That's the only thing we can ship Vulkan on. We don't run, use other APIs. We need Vulkan stuff that's not included for Brigade to run. And then we also don't know what NVIDIA's hardware is going to look like, later this year. I mean, if they have 4 times the ray tracing cores, everything gets sort of accelerated in a different way. We probably want to spend the time to make that work because, if you're going to, I think that's something that we also want to reserve a little bit of time to do. And that's kind of the thinking going behind, into these different pieces.
EJ also wants to know if there are any other types of companies that you would like to do a partnership with like that, along the same lines.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think everyone. I mean, it's literally the GTC talk was like, hey, if you guys are like what these examples are and you want to work with us, please. I mean, we're here. We're actually. Since that time, we've actually provided the Octane SDK to a bunch of companies. I guess maybe we should probably wait to see, to do something with it right before announcing like we did with Emergent Effects. But, there's a lot of value to that. I mean, I think there's just a lot of plugins that people are doing maybe 10 times over, or only for 3 DCC tools. And we can help with that. And we can also provide something that is useful even outside of Octane by providing, ray trace physics, things like that, a whole API, cross-platform tools. You can, make sure these things run on even an iPhone, or we're even looking at WebGPU, which is a Vulkan equivalent that runs in browsers that it is being developed, really powerful.
Wow.
So we can help with that. And the thing is, whether or not somebody wants to have it be a bundle in one of our subscriptions or its own price, like it's fine. Like we've been selling third-party software our entire lifetime, and we've kind of made that hidden in the current subs, but it's still like we have a lot of third-party devs, and so it felt like we wanted to get there even years ago. We had the module API out there, provided that. But I think now we're ready to make sort of a more dedicated effort around it. So anything that's a plugin for DCC tool that could leverage any of the pieces we can help with, whether it's compiler tools, whether it's getting it into 26 plugins, doing it in a uniform way, obviously reselling it to audiences, that's good. And then there's the bigger partnerships like we have with Autodesk, which is about, not just bringing Arnold, but working on industry-wide things. So there's a lot of that work that we're doing with, companies that we haven't announced it. I mean, even with Render, we haven't really talked a lot about Render a lot, but we had a huge partnership announcement with Microsoft, right? They're helping us by not just adding GPUs to the Render network on Azure, but also by working with us on driver support, getting rid of the GPU limitation that Windows eats up on VRAM, right? Because they also think that for them it's a success story if Render, decentralized Render, works on Windows. So we're open to partnerships, at least through Render, with almost anyone, and big companies, small alike, and there are some big ones that are in the mix that I guess hopefully we'll be able to announce shortly, and small ones too. So I think that's it's definitely something we're open to doing with almost anyone that could has a great product, big or small, that could add value, or even giant behemoths that see value in some of the things we're doing on the Render network or in that ecosystem.
We had a lot of questions about ArcViz, and I think a lot of it probably mainly has to do with interior ArcViz. Because if you look at different parts of this industry, there's still a huge V-Ray interior ArcViz thing, and a lot of people ask, is it worth it for me to switch over or not? So you've got things like the portal lights and all of that kind of stuff. Do you have any plans to upgrade kind of that interior stuff?
Yes. So in the roadmap slides and talk, right? We talk a lot about Spectron and all the things we're doing, but I can just say that if there's something in Arnold or V-Ray that you like, pretty much I can guarantee this year we're going to have support for it. In Octane, and one of the things that people may not realize, because it's something we've only been doing in the 3ds Max plugin, but right in the 2020 Max plugin, not too long before the release, we added something really interesting. We allow you to use Corona or V-Ray materials and all the 3ds Max things without conversion. It doesn't convert an Octane material and save it as Octane material. You just load your Max file with Corona V-Ray materials, and it'll just render in Octane.
Wow.
And it's already pretty far along. So it's not exactly what we're doing with Arnold. We're doing stuff behind the scenes to sort of on the fly at render time convert it, but it works. And it works also with V-Ray's fall off nodes and all these other things. So we could, by the way, do that with Corona for C40. Just the difference between that and with Arnold is the Arnold stuff is totally done almost like we're taking, we're just making the Arnold standard surface a core node inside of Octane. But for the other material systems, and V-Ray and Corona are so popular in the ArcViz space that it feels like one of the things that sort of held Octane back for the last few years is that the V-Ray converter was not as good as it could be. And we had actually a bunch of users, one user in Elvis Superstar 007, he knows who he is, on the forums and runs VK, Octane VK group, push us to do that. And it was actually a really good thing, because as we looked at it doing it, we realized, we could do this cleverly. We don't need to do a material converter that converts your thing to Octane materials. We just take the V-Ray things untouched and render them, and it works really well. And that's also going to, by the way, work identically. So if you have an Arnold scene or Arnold lights, or even V-Ray lights is the next step, all those things will work. And we do have very specific things related to portal lights. All that stuff is on the roadmap. And Spectron is our little SDK for creating, light shaders and light filters, but it's going to allow you to immediately do everything that Arnold does, and probably will cover V-Ray and Corona as well. Those are all very similar.
That brings up a really interesting point. So, because I'm thinking about workflow wise, and if Octane Render is able to render out and just not even converting him on the fly, but just seeing it, would that mean that someone could say work in Corona or V-Ray like materials and lights, but render in Octane?
Yeah, so on 3 Studio Max, that is basically possible.
Wow.
And that's why the reason we did it is that I feel like there's not a zero sum game for us with Octane, right? So it's like if you have other rendering tools, like it's to our benefit, I think, because we're trying to provide something that's great utility to basically make it so that existing workflows or existing scenes can still render in Octane. It's never been really a problem for us. When we started with the standalone loading OBJ files and loading other things, right? We want to support anything that's popular in a certain space. And we're going to probably look at doing the same thing in Blender, because Blender right now, we take the Cycles materials and we convert those into Octane materials. And, that's that's not going to be very necessary either, because I actually have our Blender developer looking at doing that for cycles. Probably would then allow us to do cycles 4D conversion as well, right? So it's like by the time we're done, but if we were to bring over the Corona and V-Ray auto loader, right, or auto renderer, and do the same for Blender and cycles, and then bring that over, then you basically have at least 5-6 different materials you could render in any of these other tools or renderers, and Octane would just render them, and that's great, because we do have enough. I mean, I think we're at this point probably a superset of a lot of other material systems. Like Octane doesn't need some of these very specific things to look right, and it's clearly V-Ray material and Corona material are actually fairly simple. They're not crazy complex things. There are very specific things they do that we can kind of internally map to the render at real time. And doing that without having to convert it to a material is really nice. When we did that in Max, users loved it. So we're going to probably try that. I mean, I think that's how we would also imagine, like an Arnold scene that would run in Octane as well working, because even there we actually would have native nodes for almost all of it. If there's something that isn't there, we'd still just make it as seamless as possible. So yeah,
that's insane. That's awesome.
Yeah. Billy Chitkin says this sounds like the end of the render wars.
Well, maybe it's the end of the I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think it's not the end of the render in the sense that, I mean, there's so much value to having different renders focus on different parts. I mean, like I've said it many times, like I love what Panos and Rob and Nick have been doing for years. I mean, Redshift is an incredible renderer, and it's made Octane better, I think, just because we wouldn't have moved to out-of-core and things like that if users weren't saying, hey, Redshift has this, you guys don't, like, this is not working for us. So, and vice versa. But I do think that we've taken certain choices that are part of Octane's DNA, like being spectral and doing this thing that we call unbiased. There is no truly biased options in Octane. In some ways, it's very simple. That doesn't mean that the Redshift approach isn't equally valuable and maybe more important to people in certain workflows. And I think that both of us are all looking at sort of like figuring out how, from our perspective, how to make Octane faster so that you can get speeds you'd see with biased approach, and how does biased rendering get to be as close as possible and as easy as possible as unbiased rendering. So there's this sort of convergence, but everyone's sort of working at it at once, and at least having it so that artists don't have to suffer if their materials are in one format or another just makes a lot of sense. And given that I mean, as I said, I mean, Octane's had the best year ever as far as user growth and acquisition, and that's obviously been when there's been more GPU renders than ever on the market, and really good ones, and which all of whom we know and all of whom we respect, and probably at some point, even if it's through render, we might even partner with, right? So to me, I actually am just on a philosophical level, I'm just a big believer in artists and users kind of owning their data and having something that isn't locked in. And so an Urbach's file that's part of open sourcing that and kind of making sure that whatever it is we're doing there can actually be used, decades from now. So it's not some sort of black box, ActiveX control in IE that doesn't work anywhere. That's what we want to try to figure out. And I think people want that too. I mean, open standards just help all of us. It just lifts everything going forward. And anything we can do to sort of facilitate, like if we could read a Corona material, for example, and render it, we can also then save it as, or convert that into a standard material that all the renders might eventually work with. And that's actually a really important piece too. It's implicit in the sense that if we can actually render the material live, we can also then save it into another format that we can also validate and ensure is renderable between different renderers.
And if you're looking at the big picture, it's like if you can read that, then you can export that out for the whole ecosystem as far as bringing it into AR and stuff, and you're not like pigeonholed into one individual thing. It's like you work in whatever you want, but you're using Octane Render and Brigade as the that's as the base.
So for example, iPhone, Octane Render, Brigade Render, if you can basically take your V-Ray scene from Max and save it as an Orbex, right? Maybe Max file loading it on the iPhone you'll still get your V-Ray, materials, Corona materials perfectly represented, Arnold as well, even if you just had Octane or Brigade. And Octane is fully running, it's whatever app you put out first in the iPhone, it'll be probably just standalone with the ability to load Orbex files. And the export to that is something that wouldn't require us to have, I mean, I think in order for V-Ray and Corona materials to work correctly, you also need to have those plugins installed in Max. And Max doesn't even run on the Mac or anything else, 3ds Max. So for people that want to have a portability of their art files, I mean, just having a viewer on the phone or iPad can make a lot of sense, or even able to import it into Unity. And Octane for Unreal has something really different that we've never done in any of the other plugins yet, which is it can take an Orbex file And instead of making it a proxy or a black box that only renders in the Octane viewport, it'll convert everything in that Orbex file into Unreal meshes, Unreal materials, Unreal shaders, Unreal textures, and the Orbex is gone. Octane's gone. It's like you can just render it in Unreal with shaders that are using the Unreal render. So if you think about it from that perspective, if you ever wanted to have an Orbex rendering in Unreal without Octane or Brigade or any of the stuff we're doing, that works. People are using that today. It was a lot of work, and we never have done it yet in other renders, but we almost are using Unreal as our guinea pig for that, because Unreal has a lot of power, and the developer of that plugin is also doing our Hydra work. So, it is one of those things where Orbex could also just be totally translated into other formats, USD, for example, or Unreal right in place, or GLTF, which we're probably building into the system too. But yeah, there's a lot of interesting things that could be done. And maybe one day we could even take the Unreal Engine work that we've done, because Unreal is open source, and turn that into a render delegate. So you could just use Unreal inside of all of the Octane PCC plugins, along with Brigade, along with Arnold. Right? There's no reason not to consider that. I mean, at some point I would expect both Unity and Epic to do that work themselves, to make a rendered delegate version of it. But you never know, and in some ways we might be able to do that.
I mean, they're moving so much into the production space right now with Unreal and everything, totally. 4.25 and all these new features that you have, the sequencer and the all of the camera control. I mean, you have camera controls that are very much now and like post-production controls that are very much now like Octane. It's incredible. I just started playing with it, and what they're doing is they're really concentrating on people who are using it for things other than games. So
absolutely, that is definitely with Unreal. The focus on virtual production and even just doing animations with it is pretty robust. And if you're using Unreal, try the Octane for Unreal plugin. I mean, it's basically part of your subscription package. It's also free on one GPU. And play with it too, because I'm curious to see. I mean, there are things that I like. I do like, by the way, some of the things you do in post in Unreal, but in Octane for Unreal, you can feed the Octane render buffer into the Unreal post processing stack, and it looks cool. I mean, actually, one of the things in the roadmap slides was, I think, showing exactly that. One thing that will also be pretty easy is with Octane X and probably Octane versions going forward after Octane X is released, we will have more than just OSL. We'll have GLSL support as a shader node inside of, at least in the core of Octane. How we expose that, we'll see. But a lot of what's written in Unreal is HLSL and GLSL. I mean, we could take some of those things, even Shader Toy directly, and probably feed that into Octane. It won't all have to be through OSL. And in fact, inside of Octane X, we convert OSL into something that is more like GLSL, so it can be computed along with the source code that we're building ourselves for the with the render and the plugins. And so I do think that we could actually take pieces of Unreal or other things and have that be work as modules, just like OSL shaders kind of do now, from libraries and resources that are out there.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I think I'm getting my terminology wrong. Is GLSL, is that the same type of stuff that they're doing with Touch Designer, or is that okay. So
GLSL is a much was invented primarily as a shading language for games using OpenGL. So before Apple created Metal, they did have OpenGL, ES support on the web. If you have WebGL, it's using GLSL shaders, and GLSL shaders, unlike, it's similar to OSL. OSL is a much simpler and cleaner version of what GLSL is. It's meant for shaders in a production render. It's created for that by Sony. GLSL is much more powerful in that it can be used for many things. It can be used, of course, for textures. It can be used for material shading. It can be used for compute programs. You can actually build entire programs in GLSL compute, which is what we do inside of our own tools for Octane X. And it also has vertex shaders. So you can create shaders that change the geometry. Like, imagine our displacement vertex displacement map. We kind of have that with OSL displacement maps supported in Octane. And, for example, the Touch Designer GLSL vertex maps that are used all over the place, like, we could enable those things to just work as vertex map shaders inside of Octane as well. And that's one of the reasons why in the roadmap I talked about something really fundamental to all that making sense, which is basically like Vectron displacement. In other words, having something where, unlike now where you have to actually build a mesh, tessellate it, and use vertex displacement on it, and sort of the other side is texture displacement, where there's nothing you need to do. It just takes a texture and displaces it. But it's, there's limitations for both. Vectron displacement would be, you can write shaders, could even be GLSL by the time we implement that feature, that would work. So you could take your Touch Designer vertex shaders, drop them on an object, and just like a texture, OSL texture shader or procedural, it would be procedurally deformed, and you can have a million instances that would all share one unique geometry base that would be deformed uniquely at render time, and that would be awesome. So that's where shaders come in, and games can kind of do that, but path tracers and renders haven't quite done that. So we're, that's something that's in active development, and that's also where I think the kind of stuff you could do with, as I called that feature, I was like, well, it'd be great to take GLSL vertex shaders from Touch Designer and have them be applied through this system, and that'll be possible.
Awesome.
Another question is about buffer IDs. I guess the calculation time, are you working on making that faster? Because I know that has to be a separate calculation, right, for those passes? Yeah.
So it is one of those things where we haven't done a huge amount of work on that since we added Cryptomat, because Cryptomat hopefully
Cryptomat's pretty killer.
Cryptomat, by the way, and I guess it's very fast enough. It is done on the GPU. It's practically for free. It's not like these, and we want to kind of see, and I guess my answer to that question is, can you give us a case where Cryptomat isn't supporting what you need?
Yes.
Because it's still one of these things where, like, we added Cryptomat and we did the best we could with that to make sure that we are satisfying those requirements. And I have to say that every feedback from users since we've added Cryptomat is, oh, this is great. We actually don't need you to support 20 different masks because we can get it from Cryptomat. And if we're not, or there's a bug, I'd rather fix that than work on some other iteration. That being said, in the roadmap that we presented, I mean, custom AOVs is hugely important. So we're going to add that in Octane as soon as possible. That might even get pushed ahead of some of the other things in the roadmap, given where things may line up this year. Once that's done, though, we also want to build a whole new AOV system. I mean, just having it a little bit more like with Arnold, where you can send an AOV to a driver and it can be sent to display or JPEG, whatever, all that stuff. We want to sort of solve, in a secondary step, and even build more compositing tools inside of Octane. I mean, some of the stuff we're doing even in the next release with a compositing node could very easily take AOVs and custom AOVs and do really interesting stuff with that. And the other really cool piece is when we do have Brigade and Octane and any other render plugin working, those will also be fed into the compositor. So if you want to do volumetrics in Brigade and just overlay that in Octane, you can make that work. If you wanted to do something volumetrics in Arnold and drop that into over Brigade, that could work. All these different ways of mixing things. Maybe it won't be nuked, but it'll probably cover a lot of what you could do in sort of the compositing workflow, certainly in Photoshop. I mean, the goal is we get you to not have to go to Photoshop for your final renders. It can all be done within Octane with the compositing tools that we would be adding and the imager nodes and all that stuff. By there.
Billy's asking, is there a way to blur a texture within the shading network, either through OSL or, on the roadmap?
I think that would be a really cool node, would be a blur node.
Yeah. So that is absolutely, there is an OSL shader that does that, and it's actually, we're looking at that and we're improving it further, and it'll be one of the built-in nodes. Like if we do a very first update of 2020.2 with whatever performance and improvements we've done, it'll also include, that release would be coming earlier and could even be coming within a month if we get our things lined up with all the OSL nodes built in, and a blur node is definitely part of that. A general convolution kernel node that allows you to do erosion, dilation, anything you could feed into a convolution kernel that's 5x5 or 7x7 would work. Gaussian blur would easily be one of those things. Has to be in there. Absolutely would be a built-in node. It would be written in OSL, but that works already. And the fact that Billy's asking for that and users don't even know that there's an OSL shader that's out there. Well, that's exactly why we're just probably for this day forward, we're just anytime there's a cool OSL shader out there, of course you could drop it in before we do, but we're probably just going to keep updating Octane with more and more built-in nodes that cover every cool thing out there. And in some cases, I think we can also take some of these things and improve on them a little bit. We're working on sort of the Uber color correct node that's Autodesk uses, which is great. We're going to clean that up a little bit and add some Octane specific stuff. They can also, of course, take that into other renderers. But there's things like that we want to really make easy, as you were saying at the beginning, quality of life improvements. And OSL, I think I really misjudged how much friction it is for artists to even think about code or right. versus having everything there, even math nodes, right?
Yeah. That's why it's hard for us to jump into Unreal.
And I think that we're definitely going to make it so that if anything you might want to do in OSL, sorry guys, am I back?
You're good.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Sorry, when I get a call on my it seems to.
Oh.
Basically building an OSL functionality is really clearly something we have to do. You can obviously also keep doing that, but people have also been talking about OSL closures. The thing that really slowed down. If you guys remember Octane 3.1 that never was released, that version of Octane had full OSL closures, and it was just I started to think, this is complicated for users. It gets in the way of more than it helps. So we may still add that back in there just so we could support more types of materials. But from the artist perspective, we really doubled down in 2019 doing the layers, like layered materials. So we added in 2019, you could just add different sheen and BRDFs as much as you want. That is basically how closures from an artist perspective kind of should work. So we can keep doing that. And I think that making sure that everything that artists want to have is expressed in the node graph with built-in nodes is kind of like a top priority. Can always be modified or extended with OSL, but I think that OSL is there more for advanced users that might want to do something that we haven't thought of yet. And if it's something that really does work, I think going forward, we're going to try to at least ensure that that can be a built-in node so that everyone can use it. Even putting them in LiveDB seems like that's too much friction. I mean, it's weird, but that's why we're doing this step now. That was not enough. I thought putting all of them there might help, but yeah.
And it's nice, like for me, like what I really want sometimes with an HDR, I want to be able to blur and desaturate an HDR, like right off the bat. That's something like that. Plus, you're also going to have that when it comes to cameras, chromatic aberration, lens flares, things like that. That's all OSL, right?
Yeah, it is. I mean, I think our responsibility is people don't realize the universal camera, which everyone loves. And by the way, that is coming to the plugins with 2020. It's in C48, it's in the standalone. Problem is all of our OSL nodes and script nodes that we built for the core that are sort of extensions to Octane that are built on top of it. The universal camera is actually using like 5 or 6 different OSL cameras and some crazy scripting system to make it all work. And that's also how we're expanding it. But that is something that while we're creating standalone, does not work great. Even the volume spotlight that we did for 2018 didn't work great in the plugin. So what we're doing is we're making so that all these nodes appear to the plugins as if they're built-in, baked-in nodes. That will make it so that Houdini and these other tools, Blender, can all use universal camera, anything else we add to the system much more easily. And yeah, all the stuff that comes from adding chromatic aberration and lens flares and all that stuff is something that we're probably going to build in our own OSL system, but we're still going to probably bake it into the universal camera at some point. And we're going to have a lens system. You can swap in different lenses that give you those different effects, and there'll be nodes too. And ultimately, even building all of Octane inside of Octane itself through the node system will be possible. Not only are we adding GLSL, but we're also looking at adding full C++ compilation inside of a node, the equivalent of a script node, so that you could build, if you wanted to have a source code version inside of any of the plugins and test C++ code, it would just work. We'd have a full compiler in there, and you could use that to write anything. I mean, Arnold has that, for example, C++ nodes for their procedurals and shaders and things like that. I don't think it's truly necessary if you have really robust shader languages, but for what doesn't work, we'll have that in there as well, and we'll also allow you to compile that and publish that as extensions through the Render SDK.
Another question is, and I don't even know what this is, but will we see some SDS path rendering in 2020 plus?
SDS, I'm not familiar with the term myself, so maybe I need to.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't know.
But there will be the hybrid kernel for doing things like caustics and stuff. Have we touched on that much?
So we have not. That's definitely something that's probably at the end of our projected roadmap, because I think we want to get everything else done first before we get to that. That is something that we've been looking at for years. There's actually a user on the forums asking us for progressive photon mapping for, I don't know, 7 years. And I think that there's a couple of reasons to do something like that. For one reason, if you ever want to do a proper, production-ready irradiance cache with Octane, and use the way that it's been done in V-Ray and in Redshift, I mean, those are, that's something we could do with that kernel. The reason why we really wanted to do it is that it can generate beautiful caustics, better than even PMC, and probably at very fast speeds. And that's something that we want to just enable for users that want caustics and that want to have it, at this quality and at this speed. And so that's the primary motivation factor for doing that kernel. And then what it does do is it just generates essentially a caustic AOV separately from the rest of Octane that is then composited over it. It can also be fed into other parts of the renderer too. So that's why it's sort of called a sort of hybrid mode, because it still does path tracing to the rest of it, but caustics are sort of handled in a special case with a progressive photon map. I mean, it's still essentially rendering caustics, but it's doing it in a whole separate function of the renderer. And that I think is something we know we want to have in there, and I think the work for that has already started. So it's not like we're at the very beginning of it, but it's still probably, I'd say 15% of the way done. So when that drops, it would probably be after almost most of the other things in the core roadmap would be in there. But it does get you one other thing as well, which is because you're generating a photon map even for the caustics, you can do that for irradiance. You can basically then, if you wanted to use bias rendering in Octane and disable GI and just do it through an irradiance cache, that would work. We want to use that essentially for Brigade in ARKit mode. Like we're doing that behind the scenes with a whole crazy process that we've built. So building that into the PPM kernel and getting both of those things solved in basically inside of Octane would be great. And that's why it's an important feature. That's why we put it on the roadmap and let people know it's coming, because I think we want to know, with those pieces there, like how important is this relative to everything else? Do you want it sooner? Does it come later than anything else? But it does feel like that's an inevitable piece of work we want to try to to do. And I don't think that caustics rendered that way have been done exactly the way we're thinking of doing it on the GPU. So it's going to be interesting to see if we can come up with anything really, really clever or cool. But yeah, that's something that's going to, I think, be a really nice improvement for anyone that looks at caustic maps and struggles between doing it, cheating, where you can basically do it as a projection, or using PMC or whatnot to try to get there.
I guess STS is subdivision surface.
Oh, yes, sorry. Yes, that is actually on the roadmap, and so there is a mode that we're looking at adding to the vertex displacement system. Right now, you have to pre-tessellate. You have to pick a tessellation scale, right, for subdivision, and it's constant. And in some ways, that's not the way that other renderers have done it with vertex displacement. You can basically do it at screen space, so that the closer you are, the more it subdivides the mesh relative to the viewpoint. So we're looking at adding that. It's not truly, that isn't really a silver bullet, because at the end of the day, if you really want to have the render perfectly, you're losing data when you subdivide it differently based on the view. And if you're doing something where it's like a crazy camera projection, it may not even work. But we are going to add that, because it's not that hard to make it so that based on the your proximity to the camera, especially if it's one of the existing camera models, that'll be turned on. I do think that the longer term solution might be to come up with something where you're able to do true procedural displacement without using subdivision. And that's where sort of that vectron displacement system, or even the texture displacement system we have, that could be made more procedural. That would be the silver bullet. But we recognize that, frankly, if part of adding vertex displacement was sort of an acknowledgement that actually is an important step we have to deliver this year or today, right? Because we don't have the other pieces yet. So improving that further and making it so that it's adaptive is definitely on the roadmap, and even making it faster when it's tessellating and adaptive is also on our roadmap as well. So that's that's sort of our plans around subdivision. Maybe doing more of that on the GPU, so it's even faster. Is also an option that we're exploring as we do that work.
Another question: will Emergent and Brigade work together?
100%.
Cool.
100%. So
cool.
No question at all. Yeah.
Yes, no question at all.
No hesitation.
I mean, the whole thing is, I think the Emergent rendering and what they've done already with the viewport speed is really good for volume. So the first thing we'll just do is we're going to make that we're going to make that quality and that mode work identically when you have Brigade rendering the rest of it, right? And everything you've shown in Brigade, including volumetric rendering and lighting and path tracing, just combining those two just makes a ton of sense, because if we're going to have Emergent running inside of your IPR, even in Octane, why not let you also have the real-time version of that? Emergent showed that it can render those volumes really nice. Some people have said the quality of the Emergent rendering is almost as good as what you need for some final rendering, right? So Brigade will be that way too. It may not be Octane quality, but that's not the point. Direct lighting isn't full path tracing quality either, and it's there as a kernel for various reasons. So I think that Brigade and Emergent together absolutely will be a thing. And more importantly, you'll be able to to use them both in the IPR in real time or in game engines. But it might be good enough for final quality rendering in a bunch of cases. That's definitely where real-time rendering is going anyway, maybe a level below that. But you're seeing Unreal Engine stuff that's rasterized with, that's being used for animations and things like that. So, Brigade and Emergent for sure together, Octane and Emergent for sure together. And if we, in both those cases, we'll be able to load the simulation data right into the renderer, which will be great. And in the other cases, I think we're definitely going to have a way to cache it, because even to get the round trip stuff we're looking at, we want to cache to BDB. And that will mean that even if you're using Brigade to get real-time rendering working, you'll also be able to then save that or cache the data and use it in a different render. Like Arnold, again, is our first, third-party, use case for that. And we want to make sure that works. And again, for Redshift or even Cycles 4D or any of these other things where, as long as they can sort of read the common data format that we would be exporting the Emergent simulation to, maybe VDV, maybe we can come up with something better down the line, it'll work.
Cool. All right. What about, here's one. When will the red jacket be available in the Otoy shop?
Yeah, that's a really good question because I've got one, but it's
it's been for employees and friends of the company. I actually have not thought about putting it on the shop page before, but maybe we will. So
because you got to do an XL for people like me. Because I had one and it didn't fit.
They fit a little snugly. The large one doesn't. It's kind of tight on me. I need an XL as well.
Okay.
Yeah, us dudes who sit at the computer all day,
Yeah, I love this jacket. I mean, it's truly it's great. And I think that actually when I've run into people over the the years, when I first met Ahmed for the first time, I gave him my years-long Otoy hoodie. So that was his, I sometimes do that as well. But yeah, it's great to see people actually want one, and so we've just given it out sort of like this. People, if you guys, I think just got one, just visiting us. But yeah, maybe we'll put it on the shop page and we'll order more because I think we're actually running low on our stockpile here in the office.
Yeah, I had to give mine to Zubair because I was like, fat man in a little coat. It was way too small for me. So, and then let's see, can we
render maybe? We should.
What's that?
We haven't really talked about render so much.
Yeah,
which is
yeah.
Talk about render. Yeah.
I want to make sure we answer all the questions too. But with render, there's some big important pieces that are relevant there. So it is now officially launched, and right before the launch, the GTC talk was describing what we're doing to make this easy to use for people. And the very first thing that we learned during the beta, and there's some great things that happened during the beta. Like we did get our very first commercial work that was done on people's, random people's individual GPUs was John Knoll's work for the Hayden Planetarium. John Knoll, visual effects god, head of ILM, just called us up and was like, I need to render this in an hour. I'm using Octane for Moda. How? And so we're like, well, we've got this new thing, Render Network. You want to try it? He's like, whatever, let me do it. Yeah, and it worked. It worked great. So that's why he gave us that testimonial. And a month later, we launched. And with that launch, we also did something that I think is important, which is people don't understand cryptocurrency or tokens or where to get them that well. So what we've done is and I think we announced this publicly, the tokens are listed on Probit. So Korean exchange, small thing. We did that mainly so that people that are currently in the beta or have been on mining render at least have some way of getting the tokens turned into money, but it's just a small exchange. We definitely want to launch on something much bigger soon this year. On the other side of the equation, we also need to have people easily buy tokens or buy render power. So what we did on the shop page when we launched render was we allow you to basically the same way as org. You can basically spend as €1 and you get the equivalent of 4 tokens. The tokens were based on 25 cents of work of Octane Bench on Amazon and others. And that's there. So that now if you just use your existing Octane account or your Stripe or PayPal thing, you can just buy render credits. And those credits are basically behind the scenes. We'll take dollars and then we'll send the 4 tokens out to whoever is doing the render job. And that, I think, is going to make it much easier to use. And then we also have bought a ton, and we're using the tokens that we've actually bought off the exchanges to do that. We're also thinking of providing, and we're not sure exactly how this works, we also want to provide like a bunch of free tokens for people to use so they can try render. We had thousands of people sign up in the first day, and we have people starting to render, but it's still costs $1 really to get in the system. So why not see if we can, if you're a subscriber or an enterprise subscriber, provide some tokens, maybe even recurring ones, just to see how people use it. And that's definitely one of our plans sort of in the very short term. Delta syncing so that you don't have to upload a full Orbex. We've also been looking maybe at letting you upload a C40 file because there is sort of the Maxon does have an SDK for that. The problem is you have to export meshes for that. So we want to make sure if we're going to do it, it works just like a C40 file without the same size or whatever. That is one of our high requests. And of course, we want to bring on other renders. Arnold is not going to be the last third-party render. I mean, we're talking to many more, probably for about as many years. And when the time is right, we'll announce, hopefully be able to announce that. And I think that the other really interesting bit is that there's more things that can be done in render than just rendering. I mean, it's like, if you wanted to do simulation work or if you wanted to have other stuff done
that would be nice.
On there. Yeah, it's essentially, that's the whole point of having the SDK even out there and even provided for third parties. There's also people that might just want to build a job, which is kind of what they do. If you're running an Amazon instance and you want to run an app or a program or something, you could sort of put that together and you can send it to the cloud and it'll run on a GPU. We could do the same for render, but the scale that we have is crazy. I mean, we do have, just in that 1 week where we let people sort of sign up and be registered, I mean, we just have more power than the public cloud. And the interesting thing is that none of our partners, including Microsoft, who obviously publicly is supporting the render project, are threatened by that, because the issues that we have is the cloud pricing between Amazon, Azure, and Google is largely the same, and they also just don't have hundreds of thousands of GPUs. There's a hard limit that is making it very difficult for our previous rendering service Orc to scale as fast or as much as we'd wanted to. So Orc is basically being replaced with render, and we'll have a special mode in render that is that allows you to basically totally upload your data in a different type of bucket, so it never gets sent to any decentralized nodes, and it gets rendered only on nodes like the Amazon ones or whatever that are studio certified. So if you're doing a Marvel movie in Octane, and we're now probably on our third Octane, Marvel movie using Octane for some cool stuff, that's for you. For everyone else, though, even John Knoll, like the decentralized network is good enough and it's secure. I mean, we do have end-to-end encryption in there. And we're also letting others kind of white label it. So like with PixelPlow and some of the other render farms, we've enabled them to just offer Octane, and behind the scenes it's still sort of like it's token based. It's all sort of there to simplify that work as well, because there's some great value from having these operators do that. And I think with with render now being launched, we can also let them just also be render nodes. There's no reason you can't do both and see what jobs come in and saturate your system. So it's really cool.
Let me ask you a question. So for people who are using render, like me, for example, who is almost always on the beta, the newest release or whatever, am I able to upload that? That's one of the biggest problems I've had with some of the, the third party render farms and stuff, is that, being on the beta, it sucks because I'd have to jump back a full version, like the most stable version. Am I able to upload that to render and it work fine? Or
yes, so the short answer is yes. I mean, everything that Orc could do, and Orc had exactly that system. Every single version of Octane since we launched Orc was basically a version on Orc that you could select or you could load or that you would sort of detect. And what we've done with render is, because it launched the same day as 2020, is we're not going back to 2019 or V4, any of that stuff. It's 2020 stable is the very first and currently the only version on render that you can use. But going forward, if we do 2020.2 or .3 or whatever, every version from 2020 onwards will still keep on the system. And that's actually going to be necessary when we add Arnold. Like if you want to switch from Octane, I mean, versioning and multiple renders will be a choice that you have on the service, and we'll do our best to make sure that it's manageable. I mean, certainly for Octane itself, we have total control over updating it. We did this for years with Orc. I think when we're with our experimental builds, it's a little bit trickier when we're closer to release candidate, maybe, but certainly when any stable release goes out there, anything that's on the downloads page, right? Where it's stable, those will always be on there. So you'll have multiple versions, and probably behind the scenes when we're reasonably sure that a even an experimental build is useful, we may throw it up there because it's gonna work. I just think that we're probably not gonna maybe let people go backwards to those experimental builds maybe once where it's stable, right? Because the whole point is we don't want people to go back to even 2019 or whatever. There's a certain point where it's like maybe the stable versions of each of those releases, if there's something specific about that you want or you're on that version, those will be there. And maybe for temporarily until we get to a stable version of, let's say, 2021, right? There may be XP builds of that next year. They go for forever. Forever, hopefully not forever, like for 4 months or something. And so during those 4 months, we would have experimental builds on there. And once 2021 would be stable, then those experimentals would go away, and then we would then, you'd have to use 2021 stable. I mean, ultimately, hopefully no one's building and uploading scenes even to render with 2020 RC3 or something. I mean, there's things that just get fixed and changed that, we kind of want to make sure are adapted. And with Orc, we did do experimental and RC builds all the time. So it works. It's just something that we're just not going backwards beyond 2020 net right now.
Gotcha.
And it also gives us a little more time to get it to work even more efficiently, because we aren't just doing it monolithically like on Amazon like we did with Orc. It's now going to be on everyone's machine's going to have to be able to pull down latest version of Octane or the current different versions. But that's part of the system growing. I mean, it's definitely going to be a capability. And we hope even more powerful with tools and totally different software than Octane even also being an option for your jobs.
And for those who want to start using render, what do? They're just rendertoken.com?
It's actually now on Otoy.com. So RNDR .otoy.com. So in other words, org.com, org.otoy.com, which is where you go for org jobs, is now just render.otoy.com, rndr.otoy.com. And it looks a lot like Orc did. It's a web interface. You can upload an Urbex file. You can basically, if you do have cryptocurrency tokens that Ethereum tokens, a render token, you can just drop that in there with MetaMask if you have them, or if you have, if you have and you have to have an Octane subscription of some kind, or be on maintenance. You have to just be on Octane 2020 because we're not supporting earlier versions of Octane anyway. So that's the minimum requirement right now. And if you buy, credits, you can do that with the same credit card or even with PayPal, as we've done, with your existing Octane account to pay for rentals or whatever. And that gives you tokens that you can use on the service. It's very easy to use. You don't really need to leave the web page, and you just upload an Urbex, and it just works. And it should be very straightforward. One thing that we will do for users that that are looking to try to experiment with it and want zero risk is we will probably be offering some tokens in the coming month, maybe, to try render out. So we have enough tokens in reserve, and we're figuring out how many users you have to give this to. So I think there'll be that, but I think that certainly dropping a dollar on a or euro on a render job just to try something out is low risk.
Sure.
I think with Orc it used to be $5 increments, so now there's really, I think, no maximum or minimum, and it's very fast. I mean, everything that we've seen on the decentralized network, because there's so many more nodes, the results do seem to come back faster than they ever did on Orc, which is great. And one thing we can do on the decentralized network that we can never do on the public cloud is we've always wanted to have cheaper pricing, tiers where low priority, or depending on availability, it's quarter the price or something. So instead of being 100 Octane bench per dollar per hour, it's 400, 800. Those actually work on render because we have so many more nodes that that Amazon didn't, right? So that lower pricing that Amazon offers is only if you have availability. They never did. I mean, every time we get serious, work done on the cloud, one customer could use up all of AWS. So that's not true of render, and therefore the value of that dollar that you spend is way higher on the render network. So I think people should try it out, and we're excited for that to happen. And I think giving people sort of a just like we're doing probably with Emergent, we'll give people some sort of free taste of it, a free version of it or something. Having render tokens free issued to people. Well,
no, but
it's one of those things where I think we see so many cases where people just don't try things enough, even if they're very low cost. And I think once they do, then they become customers. So it's like that's what we've seen even with free versions of Octane for Unreal or Unity or Blender. I mean, it has driven up the paid subscribers because at some point people want 2 GPUs. At some point, if we give them a little bit of render and they want more, they'll pay for it if they find some use in it. If they don't, then maybe it's not for them, and that's fine. That's kind of where I think we're heading next, is making it really easy for everyone to try out and use. And hopefully, what I'm hoping for is render becomes so easy to use and so powerful, especially if we make uploads simpler and things like that, and the costs keep the costs sort of the way they are now. Then maybe investing in a second node or a whole other GPU box doesn't even make much sense if render can really handle your frames for you, and it's just that simple, that easy, and that inexpensive, and that reliable. So
well, and I like that idea too.
That's what we. Yeah.
There's there's so many people that want to try it, and the first thing that they're going to want to do is take a scene that they've already rendered and they know how long it took, and put it on there and say, okay, what's the difference? And if they have some free credits to try that out and compare between their setup and what they can do on render, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, I think I think that's the point of basing it on Octane Bench, is that if your scene's taking a certain amount of time and your Octane Bench is 300, and it takes an hour, and you have 300 Octane Bench hours, right, to use to do a render with, if you up that to 30 to 10x, right, and that's kind of where it could go. I mean, you could figure out how much faster it is to render on the cloud. And that's exactly what John Knoll was doing. The calculation we used, like, I need to deliver this in hours. There's no way. And he was doing everything, I think, on a couple of 2080 Ti's. And it was going fine. It would have been fine if he'd had, like, I don't know, another week or a weekend even, but it was just like, it was due immediately. Yeah. And he had no choice. And I think if you scale things up to even higher levels or more users, that's where that works. But there's also something where it's like, well, heck, this thing is so inexpensive relative to the tens of thousands I might invest in a render farm that it just makes sense to use it. And that's where we'll have to see what user behavior does. And even having Octane now running on MacBooks, I mean, we're talking millions of more machines that can, hundreds of millions that can run Octane that never could before. That'll have probably pretty low Octane bench. I mean, even if a great MacBook Pro with an Intel chip can run 30 or something Octane bench, it's still not 300 like a 2080. And so being able to sort of send that to render and get your 10 10-second animation back and do that, at a cost that's reasonable, might be nice. And that's why it's there. I mean, it's not meant to replace anything specifically, but it could be a really valuable option for people that are looking to not necessarily invest in more hardware or more servers or any of that, or just don't have that as an option. So we'll see how it all plays out. But I do think that when you're talking about rendering much more advanced things, like if you're talking about doing giant 14K or essentially location-based entertainment renders, things like that, I mean, that's where render is very powerful. And then there's the whole thing of holographic displays, which are a crazy sort of use case for us. I mean, going forward, like somebody was mentioning on the comments, a looking glass display, like that's 8K, but the holographic displays are 32K by 32K per, basically per square foot. Currently powered by 15 or 16 RTX 6000s per display, just to get it to rendered stuff, both in real time and both offline. So if you're doing an offline render and you don't want to have to render that live with all those 16 GPUs, that's where the render network could be really useful, because you can at least pre-compute a good chunk of that for those kinds of displays. And so the size of large format rendering is something that I think render is going to be great for that. And we'll see. I mean, there's also other things you could be doing with render as we provide more tools and more things around AI and other pieces. But my hope is it becomes as simple as like adding another GPU. That's obviously something people can do with one click or one checkbox. It's almost free if you have the studio license. So if render is able to sort of offload work as simply as that, and it's essentially very little weight, very little latency, and it just runs well, that might be useful, super useful.
And questions about primitives too. Are there plans for more light primitives and for more primitive shapes as nodes for uses of like masking, I guess?
Yeah. So there's, the roadmap for Spectron was really pretty deep as far as all the different light primitives we're adding. I mean, we're adding disk primitives, tube light primitives, both to Octane and Brigade, portal lights, sky dome lights, mesh emitters specifically, so that you can just make a light and attach a mesh to it, and it'll be sampled more efficiently than just having an emissive material. So there's a lot of work being done there, parallel lights, multiple distance lights. Again, anything that you might see in Arnold is like one of the very first things we'll probably just have replicated pretty straightforwardly in our nodes. And then for primitive types, yes, I mean there's definitely things that we're looking for doing for splines, Bezier surfaces, that we're looking at, and I think that's also something where we want to think about how that would work in RTX land, where there's obviously right now only support for tri-meshes, but the next two primitive types that would be very valuable to have supported would be things like spheres and curves or hair and things like that. So I think that there may be some more work to be done there, but as far as new primitive types, I would say that nerves and other implicit surfaces there would be interesting. Boolean geometry operations would be really interesting. And also, I mean, there's a lot you could do with Vectron. So, Vectron operations, even in volumes, is something that we barely touch because, again, kind of like with the universal camera and even some of the other pieces, we need to make it easier for the plugins to expose these things. So we're working on that. But we're also working on something on the roadmap which allows you to turn a mesh into a Vectron asset, and then you can do all sorts of things with that as well. So it's going to be interesting to see where these things go, but there is a lot of effort being put into making sure we get the kinds of things that people would probably want to see in the order, right? And the light primitives are definitely happening soonest, and then after that, I would say nerd primitives would be on the next highest on the list, and Boolean geometry after that, and then figuring out how to get volumes and SDFs and other things to be even more useful across plugins.
I want to know a little bit more. You had a slide up. And it had a shot of something David Brodeur rendered, and you were talking about fabric materials. Yeah. I want to know more about that.
Yeah. So here's the thing. I saw his render after I had made my slides, right? And it looked great. But we were internally, I mean, there's a lot of work. I mean, there's one slide that talks about BRDF improvements, which are probably going to be ready kind of soon in terms of some of the other features. So nested dielectrics are part of that work. I mean, it's just basically fixing and improving the materials. So GGX, which is one of the BRDFs that we support in Octane, isn't energy preserving. It's actually something that is a bug, I would say, that is the reason why it's not the case now. And the Octane default BRDF is energy preserving is we didn't want to slow down Octane by making GGX energy preserving. We figured out finally how to do that. So that's going to be fixed. And then we're just looking at other things like Raphael Rao, give us amazing feedback on almost every part of the BRDF and other system which we're using. Which we're looking at really is like one of our like, are we making him happy? If we are, then we're probably okay on that front. So different BRDFs are things we're looking at, and the fabric one was something we were developing anyway. It was just like there's clearly a way for us to do fabric rendering even at the quality, that was seen, that you were showing that sample, it was not done with the BRDF. We can make that work, either render faster or easier or look better. And having something like that is equivalent to what we did recently in 2020 with the hair BRDF, which was hair material essentially, which is just for hairs, but it's designed for hair rendering. And if we do something similar, where we take that fabric BRDF and make that really straightforward so that fabrics look absolutely perfect and render even faster, that would be the idea. Doesn't mean that you can't do great fabrics in Octane today, obviously, as that image that we used showed. But it was, I really wanted to show a sample of what fabric rendering in Octane currently looks like. And also, even if it looks like that and it's easier and it's faster to render, that's a win. So that's where that BRDF comes into place. And the other BRDF work is we're just going to make sure that Arnold standard surface, which is a very specific set and ordering of layers and how it works, is basically baked into Octane and is super fast, because that is one of the things that we could probably have done a translation for that. It's actually a little bit more specific than even the V-Ray or Corona materials. So we felt, no, this is where we should do a specific separate material node that'll be identical to Arnold's. It'll be optimized. The reason standard surface in Arnold exists is because it does limit you in certain ways, but it gives you, more efficient rendering speed for any renderer. So that's something we'll definitely leverage for that material type. We're also planning to have a way to automatically, even maybe on the fly, convert any universal material or Octane material into standard surface, something we'd want to do anyway to try to get it so that if you plug in Arnold into an Octane scene and you do it through the Hydra render delegate, we can at least support Arnold render delegates that way, and even anything that supports standard surface. So it's all, material conversion and support is really interesting, and a lot of work is going into that.
Man,
it's awesome.
I'm looking at my notes. I feel like we've covered just about everything that I had in my notes. That's pretty amazing. I do want to get a little more feedback on where you are on building the holodeck. I feel like every time we come there, you have like something else going in the mad scientist lab there, and one of these days we're gonna stop by and you're gonna be like, oh yeah, the holodeck's ready, and you're gonna open a door and we're just gonna see it. Just be like Riker walking in for the first time.
Yeah, well, I mean, there is some positive news, and I'm not sure where we were at when I was last on the show, but Lightfield Lab, who's our, we have a partnership with them, and it's a really long-term partnership, because they're obviously, I mean, they're building these displays. The good news is they got a lot of funding. They closed a $28 million round of funding. I think it was late last year. I don't know. I mean, it's fairly recently. So they've actually scaled up significantly. Their investors were people like Samsung. So imagine Samsung, which makes TVs everywhere, whatever. I mean, they're obviously, I think Comcast and others were investors. I mean, so it's great because it does sort of validate. It gives them funding to build the hardware, which is what we all need. It also sort of, the types of investors they got kind of show you that the big display manufacturers like Samsung, which I think is the big, maybe them and LG are the biggest providers of displays in the world. For Samsung to invest in that round is like, well, Samsung kind of believes in the principle of it, and ultimately you'd imagine them, when this holographic displays are ready, they would actually build a lot of these displays. Like, it's not going to be like the lab that's going to build and sell you the TV or the wall or whatever. It's
They're just making the technology
that they license this stuff to.
Yeah,
exactly, like Dolby does for sound, right? That kind of thing. And that's good. So the fact that that's on track, and these guys got a huge funding round this early with these kinds of investors is fantastic. They moved to a much larger office a couple of months back. And, COVID is like, maybe slowing stuff down a little bit, but I mean, they're basically on track to keep building the commercial versions of these displays. I think it's maybe a year out before they would be able to show something, and we'll see how COVID affects, things like that. But that was where we were sort of at before all this sort of happened. And it doesn't seem like they're too far off from that. And it would probably be first and foremost used initially for, large venues, right? It's like concerts, theme parks, things like that. Those would be the customers that would be able to afford this first versions of it. And just like, 4K TVs were, I think Panasonic's first plasma thing or whatever 4K plasma was like $150,000. Now 4K TV is like $400, right? It's like it's going to be like special. That for these things too. And so it's really just about waiting out the sort of the commoditization of these display panels, because they are display panels. There's nothing like, you don't have to build lasers or have cold fusion or whatever to power this thing. It's just it is built on existing materials. There is a bunch of nano filters, things that they do at the nano scale, which is great. But that's kind of it's all there. And so our work with them is, well, when they get it ready for things like theme parks and concerts and stuff, that we can at least power that even if it's 16 GPUs per square foot or something crazy like that. But hopefully by then, that's why we're looking at Ampere, which is where NVIDIA does need to put more ray tracing cores on those GPUs, because whatever we're doing that's not completely pre-computed and just fed in there is something that we'd want to run through ray tracing hardware. So I think that there's a good chance that the holodeck panels might get built, and the harder problem is going to be how do we get the GPUs to actually be, like instead of being 16 GPUs per square foot, like 1 GPU per square foot. And that's not impossible. You can see the trajectory of, let's say that the rumors are true and that there's 4 times as many ray tracing cores. Instead of 16 GPUs, you could be down to 4 per square foot. And if you extrapolate, them going down to, from 7 nanometers to 5 to 3 or whatever, in a few years, you might be able to get to 1 GPU per square foot per panel, something like that. And then
in the next 10 years,
the whole system is modular.
It'll.
I think sooner than that. I mean, I think that 5 years and the other thing is we come up with very clever ways of height. I mean, especially if it's in a concert setting or theme park. I mean, the number of whatever the server farm is behind it, if it's not 1 per square foot, it still could be done, and it would be it would be a lot of compute power, but it's not necessarily out of the question that you can make it work. But I do think that if you look at where ray tracing hardware is going, I think which is where we're bound. I mean, it's not so much the CUDA cores, it's the ray tracing cores that would slow down or minimize the amount of GPU that you need for that. So I do think that that's something where you could see, especially as these things become more and more of a thing. And I think that one of the use cases also is like just for the Mandalorian, right? They're using these LED panels, and the camera is being tracked to that. And imagine if you didn't have to track the camera, if you could just basically put somebody in the equivalent of that Mandalorian stage with holographic displays running. Yeah, everything would just work. That the field would work. It's basically that's another commercial use case that is definitely in the cards for this stuff. So the limiting factor, of course, is them getting the displays built, but they're on their way to do that. They have the money to do that. They have that is sort of in progress. And it's not months out. It's more like a year or 2 or whatever. But that's not that far out. And I think the next step would be getting GPUs to be really efficient, so we could power stuff in real time, because it's not just sending holographic video to these panels at 32K per square foot. It's, can we send the scene data, an Orbex file, something that can run it live, and even in an Orbex file we can have Unity and Unreal dynamic stuff in there. Again, things like Emergent, right? We could do dynamics live. We are also adding physics into the node graph just so that it's built in. Soft body and rigid body are kind of there. Dynamic scene elements, things like that. We'd want to make all of that work so that the holodeck, like in Star Trek, would be interactive. And then is there actual tactile feedback on these too, or no? I can't remember. Not yet. But that is on there. There's 3 different levels of the displays, right? 3 generations. One of them is what we have essentially being built now, which is just display, and that needs to get done as and it's a visual display in the sense that you have a 2-foot board. It's like the micro LED Samsung video wall where you can just tile these things together. Mm-hmm. Second generation would add the ability for you to actually behind each display have essentially a capture system that would actually also capture the same rays of light that you would emit. So it would capture holographically. The reason why that's important is that one of the main use cases, I think, for this thing would be, video conferencing. We're all on like Zoom calls, Skype calls. Imagine that if you had a holographic display, that actually the display itself would also be the camera, and you could then beam, holographic displays. You'd have virtual conferences. You'd have essentially that in there. That is really important part of it. And that's something we can help with too, because we also have light stage and all this tech that could be used for really smart capture stuff in there. So putting a camera behind the surface is, I think, generation 2 on the roadmap. And then the third generation of those displays would have, haptics. So it would essentially use ultrasound or basically beamforming that they could do to give you some sort of, like, even if it's a pin screen in terms of its roughness, right, effect, it still would give you something you could touch. Right. And that's really important, because I still think that the holodeck is still a really interesting use case. I think, portals or windows that you can talk to people through, like a magic mirror, is valuable. But I think the most important device that we could get out there soonest would be a tabletop, where it's like the Tony Stark table thing, where it's just everything is tabletop. So it's really useful. If you have an object, if you touch things on that table, move things around, that will cover a lot. And that probably wouldn't require you to build an entire holodeck or even have a TV on the wall that you have to walk towards, right? I mean, it just would. I think that's really useful. So I think that third generation with touch and in a tabletop form factor is where you would see a lot of mass consumer adoption. I mean, maybe TVs that would be holographic, right? I mean, at some point, let's say a Samsung TV just has holographic capabilities and it goes on the market. And it's 100 inches, right? That's an obvious case where that would be a consumer offering in a form we understand. But having a tabletop holographic thing would be something where you don't need desktops, laptops, workstation, monitors, even VR and AR, because all the things you could do there can be handled live on the tabletop. And I still think that's even as we're experimenting with sort of our little SIGGRAPH demos where you see the holographic asset through the projector and stuff, I mean, the closer you get to that, the more your eyes can see detail and the more you can actually do stuff and move it and look around it. So I think the tabletop holographic displays are going to be insane. I mean, that's what I really want to see come out as soon as possible. And it is a little bit harder to do tabletops and floors and ceilings than it is to do the walls, because the walls just have a slightly different angling. So you'd have to actually, even for the full holodeck, you'd have to build panels that would be wall panels, then panels that would be vertical panels for the ceiling and the floor, basically. But once they get the floor panels done, that's essentially what would be powering a tabletop surface display as well.
And the more tiles you have, the more depth you get, right?
Exactly.
So you could do these like on a wall, and then if you had a whole wall full of them, let's say, then you could have like video conference where someone just shows up and sits on your couch, hey, what's up?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the way that it works is it's basically it's because of clipping. At some point, the holographic display, as long as what you're looking at isn't clipped by the edge of the display, it can be projected holographically, and it gets and the more and more it's from further out and on the side, the more expensive it gets. And it's a little bit like when you're wearing 3D glasses and something pops out of the screen. I mean, it can look like it's 10 feet in front of the display. The holographic display can do that, and it can maintain that as long as that thing that's 10 feet in front of the display isn't off the edge. So that's why the more panels you have, the further out you can support that projection. And it's essentially that's why the tabletop stuff works well. And yeah, in a room, if the entire surface of the room is covered in holographic display panels, and it's large enough that you can essentially, let's say it's a 10 foot by 10 foot by 10 foot volume, and the projections go out 5 feet, all the way to the center, then in some ways you're covered. And that's kind of how that would work. And we're sort of doing simulations where we can kind of see how all that plays out, and there's trade-offs and costings, because it does get expensive to project really far out at really wide angles. But it is something where there's probably a good sweet spot, and it depends very much on the size of the room you're in and how far you're from those surfaces. So that's why the tabletop one is going to look absolutely awesome, and it's not going to be expensive. I think the room-sized ones are going to push you to the highest density. You're going to have the most amount of tiles, frankly, and those tiles will have to be pretty robust. So it'll probably be millions of dollars to have a holographic, holodeck. Right. I mean, it's not going to be but that's something that's going to go down to hundreds of thousands, then tens of thousands, and then it'll be, not that much.
Well,
and that's
you won't
probably
need glasses. You won't need a helmet. You won't need AR, anything.
Exactly.
It's just that's me. That sounds like the one that a lot of people will adopt in bulk, because they don't need any of that.
I agree. And I think glasses are a friction point, even if they're really lightweight. So they'll probably coexist for a while. I mean, if they're glasses you can wear outside and give you some sort of AR experience, that's cool. But I mean, as far as the real work being done, if you're going to do 3D content creation, for example, my ideal content creation platform would be a tabletop holographic display. That would give me touch. It would give me glasses-free, volume rendering, and it just everything would feel like it would be something I could sit there, for hours, like I would in front of a laptop or a workstation doing work. Glasses, I'm not so sure about.
Gosh, think entertainment. If you can pay for a concert and just the band just shows up in your living room.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially nowadays, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Is there anything we haven't covered? My brain kind of hurts at this point. So much to ingest, so much to think about.
There always is. And I mean, I love the Mograph Slack channel. I think it's amazing. By the way, I mean, there was, out of all the different places where we got a lot of feedback for features and everything, there was the most came out of that, which is awesome. So I thank you guys for having that and for letting all of the Octane devs on there, because I mean, they're happy to be part of the the conversation too. It's great for all of us to sort of see.
Yeah, we appreciate it.
Users providing feedback.
Yeah.
But I'm always available. I mean, on Facebook, the Discord Octane group, obviously your guys' Slack, the forums, anyone that wants to ask questions, and Facebook's easy for me. For some reason, I just see questions pop up really easily on Facebook, and I can answer them almost immediately. So anyone can feel free to sort of post something, and the whole team's there to help, including me. So
cool,
awesome. Jules, as always, thank you for being on the show.
Yeah, we appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, guys. This has been awesome.
That went quick. Yeah. That was almost 3 hours. Oh my gosh, that was really quick. Stay on the line with us here after, and we'll take care of all the technical details. You can rate us on iTunes, leave a review. You can also subscribe on your podcatcher of choice. Helps get our ratings up. The newsletter goes out. Make sure you subscribe to that as well. It goes out once a month. say you've been there, done that, got the t-shirt with the Mograph logo tee, the Paul Babb, Feel the Babb 2020 shirt. All the profits from that go to Doctors Without Borders. The Render Things t-shirt, hoodie, and long sleeve tee. And then, of course, the That Render is Fire shirt, which you can only wear ironically. Kevin had to get in his Breaking Bad or The Wire reference in there at the last second.
Okay.
You know, weekly reference. Jules, if people want to find you on the interwebs, do you have one particular call sign? Do you go by your name, or do you go on? Are you on the Otoy account? Like who's
I'm the Otoy Twitter account. I mean, that happened for years. I mean, I took it over from somebody else that was I just felt, you know, so I'm at Otoy on Twitter.
Okay.
I'm at Jules Urbach on Twitter as well. On Facebook, Jules Urbach, you know, I'm there as that. And then probably every time you see it, whether it's Reddit or Discord or even the Slack channels, I'm just Otoy. So if you see cool. Otoy Inc. or Otoy Jules or Otoy something, it's me.
Cool.
And that's you know, always feel free to reach me on any of those channels. I mean, I'm around.
Cool.
Awesome.
All right. Thanks a lot. Until next week, I'm Dave.
Thank you, guys.
And I'm Matt.
Have a good one.
Later, yo. Whoo, boy. Go ahead and stop this really quick.
That was crazy. That was 3 hours.
That was great.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to hit stop recording. Is that okay? Or
Yeah.
Keep it recording?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Saving your recording. Okay. Pray that it